Arya Stark stood poised at the edge of the crumbling red keep, her heart a steady drumbeat in her chest, her eyes fixed on the broken figure of Queen Cersei Lannister. The air was thick with ash from the city's ruin, and though her lungs protested with each inhalation of acrid smoke, Arya pressed forward. She was close. Close enough that the warmth of nearby fires brushed her face and reflected in her dark eyes. Her boots crunched over fallen debris, each step eerily quiet despite the chaos around her. Once, she had been no one, a faceless shadow trained in the art of death. Tonight, she was fully Arya Stark of Winterfell, driven by a singular stark purpose: Cersei Lannister's demise. Cersei was on her knees, gown torn, hair matted with dust and blood. A fresh tremor rocked the Red Keep. Its walls groaned in agony, and the once mighty spires threatened to come crashing down. Somewhere distant, the roar of draconic fury or the screams of terrified citizens mingled with the crumbling stone. But none of that intruded on Arya's awareness. She saw only Cersei, the woman responsible for so many of House Stark's tragedies. In Arya's hand, needle hung steady, the tip aimed directly at the beaten queen. Cersei coughed, spitting blood, but still managed a glare of defiance. "You, child," she rasped, her voice hoarse and raw from inhaling smoke. "You think this changes anything? This city will never love you. It never loved me." Arya did not move her blade. A faint quiver ran through her, not of fear but of tight-reined rage and the severity of the moment. She was about to cross off the biggest name on her list. Cersei Lannister's name had haunted her, driven her forward across half a continent, and now here she was. Another chunk of the ceiling fell behind them, sending dust swirling in thick, suffocating plumes. Sparks sprayed across the rubble. Another second, and the entire keep might collapse. But Arya Stark would finish this. She would not be robbed of her vengeance by mere fate. She remembered every slight, the mocking smiles, the machinations that brought her father to the block, the cruelty that had cost Sansa so many nights of agony in King's Landing, the chaos that had torn her family apart. Anger blossomed in her chest. She had become a killer, under the tutelage of the Faceless Men, but the person of Arya Stark, the girl from Winterfell, had never abandoned her sense of justice, or retribution. Cersei tried to push herself up, rubble scraping under her palms. Blood trickled from a gash across her forehead, matting her once pristine golden hair. "Kill me then," she said, struggling for composure. A tremor of fear flickered over her face. "End it." Arya's voice emerged ragged, scarcely above a whisper. "Valar Morghulis." In one swift motion she sank needle's tip into Cersei's chest. It was not a graceful kill. Cersei's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, the fierce queen wore an expression of stunned disbelief. Her lips parted, perhaps to speak, perhaps to curse, but no words came. She slumped forward as Arya pulled the blade out, a crimson stain spreading over what remained of her gown. Even as the Red Keep trembled from the Dragonfire's wrath and the anarchy below, Arya found an odd stillness. The final name, the one she had thought impossible, was crossed off her list. She had wanted to let go of that list so many times, to pursue a freer life, but the threads of her past demanded resolution. And now it was done. She could leave. Go north. Continue her journey. Discover who she was meant to be beyond vengeance. Yet fate intervened in ways Arya Stark never would have predicted. She wiped the blood off needle with the edge of her cloak and slipped the sword into its scabbard. A chunk of masonry crashed behind her, smashing a set of pillars, and an entire section of wall collapsed in a roar of stone. Arya darted forward, searching for an exit. Flames danced across the floor, licking up drapes and devouring tapestries. There was no one to save here anymore. The corridors were deserted, the Lannister guards either crushed or fled. As Arya navigated the labyrinth of crumbling hallways, she could feel the city's collective panic. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the heightened awareness of survival. Even after fulfilling her greatest revenge, she would not let herself die in the process. She emerged onto a shattered balcony overlooking what had once been the royal courtyard. The clang of steel against steel rang faintly, overshadowed by the deafening roar of the monstrous infernos raging in the city. Smoke curled in thick, greasy plumes toward a sky that flickered red and black. Arya coughed, leaning over the edge. Below, she saw the remains of the fighting. Daenerys Targaryen had unleashed her dragon, and the devastation was near absolute. King's Landing was a sea of flames. But something was different now. The dragon's roars had ceased. Or perhaps it was distant, having moved to another quarter of the city. Through the haze of ashes, she saw outlines of unsullied soldiers, silhouettes marching in disciplined lines. They were methodically securing the streets, rounding up any surviving Lannister loyalists. The city had fallen. The Targaryen had taken it by fire and blood, yet Arya had robbed her of the final kill. The killing of Cersei that Daenerys likely believed was hers to deliver. If the Dragon Queen learned of this, what would she do? Arya gritted her teeth. She didn't regret it. The vengeance was always hers. Let Daenerys rage if she must. Arya's fate had never been tied to Daenerys Targaryen's approval. She was not a queen's subject, not truly. She was a Stark of Winterfell. And yet some whisper of the future teased her mind. A shape had formed in the ashes, something greater than her personal vendettas, something she had never imagined she would want. She slipped down the broken steps and picked her way through corridors half collapsed by dragonfire. At length, she reached a deserted segment of the keep. Groans from wounded men and screams of panicked citizens echoed from every direction, reverberating off stone. Bodies littered corners. The smell of charred flesh choked her senses, threatening to force her to retch. But she'd seen worse. She was beyond being paralyzed by gore. Each step was purposeful, though she had no clear destination. She had wanted to leave King's Landing, had planned to ride north at the first opportunity. But something compelled her to stay, at least for now. A swirl of movement caught her attention. She turned sharply, hand on needle's hilt, to see Sir Davos Seaworth step out of the drifting smoke. The older man's features were etched with lines of worry and grief, a sorrow tempered by years of battle and heartbreak. "Arya," he said softly, voice rough with disbelief. "You're alive. Gods be good." She nodded, blinking away the haze of smoke. For the moment. Her tone was clipped, but not unkind. "Is Jon here?" Sir Davos took a deep breath. "He's coming." He tried to stop the slaughter. But you know how war is. Daenerys was uncontrollable. She torched half the city. No. Arya's jaw tightened. She looked over her shoulder at the corridor that led to the Red Keep's heart, the throne room, presumably still standing in some battered form. She felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, to see the seat of so much bloodshed and strife. Or perhaps she sensed that something lay there in wait. "I need to find Jon," she said. "We have to leave." Sir Davos gave a slow nod, worry in his eyes. "Yes. The city's not safe. The fires still burn and Daenerys' forces, I'm not sure what they plan to do next." "Nay?" Arya felt a tug of guilt. She knew in some distant corner of her mind that the road ahead was complicated. If the Targaryen queen discovered that Arya, a Stark, had eliminated Cersei before Daenerys could claim that victory, Daenerys might see it as an act of defiance. But Arya could not regret it. The list was complete. She gestured for Sir Davos to follow. Moving quickly, they navigated the labyrinth of fallen stone until they emerged onto a broad corridor leading to the Great Hall. Smoke poured in from shattered windows. Here, corpses of red-cloaked guards littered the floor, the last of those loyal to Cersei. Targaryen banners, half-burned, flapped in swirling drafts of heat and dust. The hall's mighty doors were cracked open, one hinge barely holding. With a shared glance, Arya and Sir Davos slipped inside. The throne room was in ruins. Sunlight, or what remained of it through the thick smoke outside, streamed in dusty shafts, illuminating broken pillars and heaps of rubble. The once grand mosaic floor was scorched, as if a dragon's flames had licked across it, leaving soot and cracked tiles. The Iron Throne stood at the far end, defiant in its twisted majesty, though segments of melted swords dripped like wax off its edges. And there, standing before the throne, was Daenerys Targaryen. Her silver hair was streaked with soot, her face smeared with ash and tears. Gray-white wisps of smoke drifted around her as if a halo of flame had been extinguished. Her posture was rigid, shoulders squared, but Arya could sense a tremor in her stance. Eyes that had once been radiant with hope were dark, wide with a dangerous mixture of triumph and sorrow. The Mother of Dragons had claimed victory, but at a cost so high it threatened to shatter what sanity she had left. Arya sensed Daenerys' eyes flick toward her. Recognition and confusion warred on the Queen's face. She knew who Arya Stark was. She must also suspect who had carried out the final blow. There was no love lost between them, and in this instant, it felt as if the weight of the entire ruined city pressed into the throne room, the air taut with potential violence. Ser Davos shifted uneasily behind Arya. His presence was a reminder that not everyone in this room was an enemy. Still, there was no telling how Daenerys would react. The Queen took a step forward, bare feet brushing shards of glass from the shattered windows. She did not speak for a moment, just stared at the figure of Arya Stark, this small, lethal girl whose bravery and cunning had helped win the Great War. Then those lips parted. "Where is Cersei?" Daenerys' voice was thick, a barely controlled undercurrent of rage. Her accent cut through the silence like a whip. Arya kept her expression unreadable, though her hand remained on Needle's hilt. She squared her shoulders. "Cersei is dead." Daenerys' eyes sharpened. A flicker of something crossed her face. Was it disappointment, betrayal, or perhaps a twisted sense of relief? "You killed her." It wasn't a question. Arya did not flinch. "She had to die. She was on my list long before you arrived." The Queen's nostrils flared. Her gaze darted to Ser Davos, as if to confirm whether this was true. Davos offered no denial. The tension in the room was near suffocating. Daenerys' mouth tightened into a thin line. "She robbed me of my rightful throne. She killed my friends. I came here for justice." Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths, as if she were on the precipice of a fevered dream. "And you took that from me." Arya's calm was a steel blade. "She took my father's head and destroyed my family. Her death belongs to me." For a timeless moment, neither spoke. The great hall was silent except for the distant crackle of flames and the rumble of collapsing structures somewhere outside. Finally, Daenerys let out a slow exhalation, as though releasing some fraction of her fury. "It doesn't matter now," she said, her voice tremulous. "She's gone. The city is mine." Her eyes strayed to the Iron Throne. "I will take what is mine by fire and blood." Arya watched her, measured and cautious. She could sense Daenerys was on the brink. Killing her queen in a direct confrontation would be complicated. The war had already been won, in a sense, but the nightmarish cost had sickened Jon Snow and so many others. For a heartbeat, Arya considered ending the Targaryen right here, right now, before more destruction could unfold. But was that her place? Jon, her brother-cousin, might never forgive her if she murdered Daenerys in cold blood. And she did not know if it would solve anything. The city was in ruins, the people terrified. Another queen's death might only unleash more chaos. Ser Davos stepped between them cautiously. "Your Grace," he addressed Daenerys, voice careful. "The bells have rung." The city surrendered. "There's no need for more bloodshed." "No bells." Daenerys snapped her gaze to him, the raw rage in her eyes cooling to a glacial contempt. She took a measured breath. "They will bend the knee or die." Arya bristled. She recalled how House Stark once refused to bend to tyranny, and that memory fueled her tension. But she said nothing, letting Ser Davos do the talking. He swallowed hard. "Some houses have already pledged loyalty," he offered, though the words rang hollow in the massive ruined hall. Daenerys pressed her lips into a thin line. "All of them will soon enough. When they see the fate that befalls those who don't, they will have no choice." Her eyes flickered to Arya again. "Your sister, Sansa, what will she do?" Arya felt the question like the edge of a knife. "Sansa is Lady of Winterfell," she said evenly. "She won't kneel just because you want her to." The Queen's expression darkened. "I have no desire to destroy the North, but if Sansa defies me, she will be taught the price of defiance." Arya's grip tightened on Needle's hilt until her knuckles paled. She forced herself to take a slow breath. Perhaps in that moment she realized that the war was far from over. Cersei's death had not brought peace, only a shift in who held the blades. Daenerys Targaryen was poised to become a new tyrant in her quest for a final submission of the Seven Kingdoms. "Jon will speak with you," Sir Davos ventured again, trying to soothe the tension in the room. "We can find a peaceable solution." Daenerys eyed him coolly, then turned back to the Iron Throne. She stepped closer to it, fingertips brushing the melted swords, a half-wonder, half-reverence in her gaze. "I've wanted this for so long," she whispered. "I crossed the narrow sea with armies and dragons, lost so many, my advisors, my friends, all taken from me. My child was murdered in Meereen. My lover was killed in my arms. I have paid for this seat with my life's blood." A muscle twitched in Arya's jaw. She was no stranger to sacrifice, and she recognized the heartbreak in Daenerys' words. But heartbreak did not give the right to burn a city and threaten the north. Arya stepped forward, despite Davos' worried glance. "What now?" Arya said, voice steady, addressing Daenerys back. "You have your throne. Will you torch the rest of the kingdom until no one can resist you?" Daenerys closed her eyes. "They will not resist," she said simply, as if reciting an undeniable fact. When she opened them again, the warmth was gone. In its place was a colder determination, an unwavering conviction that only decades of war and madness could produce. "They will love me, or they will fear me, and eventually, they will break beneath me." Arya took another step. She could almost feel the heat emanating from the battered throne. The melted metal glistened darkly in the half-light of the ruined hall. She thought of the people dying in the streets, burning or crushed by fallen stone, the children left orphaned. She thought of Sansa, Bran, even Jon, who had tried to save as many as he could. The weight of everything pressed on her, and in that moment something broke in Arya's chest, a realization that she could not, in good conscience, simply walk away. Not from this. Not when a new tyrant threatened her family. The room grew taut with possibility. Sir Davos seemed to sense that something was about to happen. He reached out as if to grab Arya's arm, to restrain her from doing the unthinkable, challenging the newly victorious queen right after the city had fallen. But Arya was beyond restraint. She licked her lips. She felt the crack in her voice as she said, "Cersei is gone. You've broken the Lannisters. But if you truly want to unite the Seven Kingdoms, do it the right way. Win their hearts, not their terror." Daenerys turned to her fully, a slight tremble in her shoulders. "You presume to give me counsel?" She laughed, the sound devoid of joy. "I will not be advised by another Stark on how to rule the Seven Kingdoms. I am the Dragon Queen." For a moment, Arya thought of leaps and hazards. She remembered the precise movements required to assassinate the Night King. She remembered how to feint, how to slip a blade into an opening. Her breath caught in her throat as her muscles tensed. She was more than a soldier. She was a trained killer who had ended the greatest threat humanity had known. But was she prepared to kill Daenerys Targaryen right here, in her moment of triumph? Before any deadly dance could begin, the clash of steel echoed from outside the hall. All three turned to see Jon Snow rushing in, accompanied by a scattering of soldiers. His face was streaked with soot and heartbreak. He had left behind men outside, possibly to guard the entrance or to keep watch for more violence. He froze upon seeing Daenerys, Sir Davos, and Arya locked in this tense tableau before the melted Iron Throne. "Dany," Jon said, voice raw. Then he looked to Arya. "Arya, you're alive." Relief shone in his eyes, warring with 1,000 other emotions. Arya's heart twisted to see him so torn. He had believed in Daenerys, had loved her. That love still lingered in his gaze, but so did betrayal. He must have seen what she had done to the city, must have heard the bells, must have felt the hopelessness of it all. Daenerys stared at Jon, the corner of her mouth trembling. "It's over," she said, gesturing toward the ruined throne. "All of it, for this moment, for the Seven Kingdoms." Jon's voice was hoarse. "This isn't what I wanted. I thought we could save the people, not destroy them." He shot a glance at Arya, guilt mixing with relief. "I tried." Arya nodded curtly, understanding. He had tried to prevent a massacre. She looked at Daenerys. "We all tried." The queen's eyes burned. "And yet here we stand victorious. The city is mine. The people will bow. The realm will know peace through my reign, through fear if necessary." Jon closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Not like this." Daenerys turned sharply, anger flaring. Then how should I have let Cersei remain on the throne? Should I have let the Lannisters keep their power and cruelty? This is war, Jon. People die. Cities burn. Arya could bear no more. This is madness, she said softly, voice carrying in the broken hall. Listen to yourself. A hush fell. Daenerys' stare flickered from Jon to Arya, then back to Jon. Something in her expression pleaded for him to understand. For a moment her eyes softened. We could rule together, she whispered. Bring a new world. I was alone. I am still alone. But if you stand beside me, if you truly bend the knee and pledge your loyalty, the North will be safe. We will make it safe. Now Jon's grief-stricken gaze told Arya all she needed to know. He could not stand beside Daenerys after what she had done. Yet he did not have the heart to kill her. Or perhaps he still loved her, or at least some part of her. Arya set her jaw, bracing for the choice that she might have to make for him. If Daenerys would not relent, if she threatened the North, Arya would not hesitate. But the next words came unexpectedly from Jon. Dany, I can't, he said. You burned children. You burned them alive after they had rung the bells. I can't be part of this. Nace. For an instant, Daenerys looked ready to weep, as though hearing those words from Jon was the final wound. Then her face hardened. So be it, she whispered. She took a step back, toward the Iron Throne, eyes never leaving Jon's. Arya, sensing mortal peril, tensed. She did not know if Daenerys would call for Drogon to incinerate them, or if she had some other means of exacting vengeance. Time stretched. Every flicker of dust in the smoke-choked air seemed to freeze. Arya's heart hammered. And then Daenerys spoke again, eyes glistening. All of you, get out. Bend the knee, or leave the city. But if you stay to defy me, I will show no mercy. Ah. Jon and Arya exchanged a glance. Neither moved. Behind them, Sir Davos shifted anxiously. The faint metallic creak of armor from Jon's men was the only sound. At last, Jon spoke, voice shaking. I cannot bend the knee to a queen who slaughters her people. Daenerys' lips curled into a grimace. She inhaled to give an order. Arya's hand twitched, ready to draw a needle. She could already envision herself launching forward, plunging her blade through Daenerys' heart before the queen could utter a word. But the hush was broken by a soldier rushing in. He slid to a stop, panting and covered in soot. His words spilled out in a frantic rush. Your Grace, the city is. It's collapsing in the lower wards. There's a riot. People have attacked the Unsullied. They're crying out that you're a tyrant. They're fighting back. A flicker of disbelief crossed Daenerys' features. Then a cold fury. Then they have chosen their fate. She strode from the throne, sweeping past Arya and Jon without another word, her posture rigid, white hair trailing behind her like a banner of silver and ash. Her retinue of Unsullied, some battered, many with grim expressions, followed in her wake. In moments, she was gone from the hall, and the tension in the air lifted slightly, leaving only the choking presence of smoke and grief. Jon stared after her, then turned to Arya and Sir Davos. His voice was raw with anguish. We have to end this before it's too late. She'll never stop. She'll burn them all. Arya exhaled shakily. We stop her, she said softly. But how? She has an army, a dragon. Jon's expression was tortured. He was torn between love, duty, and horror at what Daenerys had become. Let me try talking to her one last time. He looked at Arya, a haunted plea in his eyes. If it fails, you do what you must. Arya nodded once. The plan, if one could call it that, was set. She watched her brother-cousin hurry to catch Daenerys before the queen unleashed another wave of devastation on the rebellious city. She wanted to believe Jon could reach her, that some part of Daenerys remained untainted. But the cynic in Arya doubted. She had seen too many fall to their own darkness, even as they claimed to fight for good. Sir Davos put a trembling hand on Arya's shoulder. Gods be with him, he murmured. Arya nodded, a lump in her throat. And with all of us. They made their way out of the great hall together. Outside, the sun had dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in a deep bruised purple, laced with flickers of orange from the raging fires. Screams echoed down the alleys, Corpses littered the palace courtyard, twisted shapes half hidden in swirling smoke. Every so often, a roar of dragon reverberated like distant thunder, a reminder of the unstoppable force Daenerys commanded. Arya's eyes scanned the devastation, her heart heavy. She wanted to leave, to find a horse and ride north, away from all this madness, away from the Iron Throne that had stolen so many lives. Yet she felt an odd compulsion to stay, as if the Red Keep itself tugged on her soul. Vengeance no longer guided her. She had had her revenge. This was duty, or perhaps destiny. She thought fleetingly of Gendry, of the nights they shared preparing for the battle against the dead, of the life she could have if she only allowed herself peace. But that felt distant now. She found a vantage point atop the ramparts overlooking the lower city. Ser Davos stayed at her side, silent. Through the smoke, they saw pockets of people fighting back. The gold of Lannister sigils was largely absent now. It was the small folk themselves rebelling, armed with pitchforks, knives, and stolen spears. The unsullied, disciplined, and well-trained pushed them back, but the wave of desperation was fierce. They were hungry, terrified, with nothing to lose. The city had rung its bells of surrender only to be bathed in fire anyway. Arya's fists clenched. She realized, with some measure of disquiet, that King's Landing had never been hers to love or hate. She had come here only to kill. But now, this city felt like a wounded beast, thrashing in its death throes, and she was among those who might deliver it from final destruction, or push it deeper into ruin. A shape loomed above them, massive wings blotting out the smoky sky. Drogon passed overhead, the sound of his beating wings thrumming in the air, accompanied by the hiss of superheated exhalations. Arya tensed, half expecting the dragon to rain fire upon the rebellious crowds. But Drogon soared away, perhaps seeking Daenerys' next directive. "Seven, save us," Ser Davos whispered, watching the beast vanish into the gloom. Arya's eyes narrowed. "We can't rely on the Seven," she said. "This city's prayed to them for centuries. Look how that turned out." Davos sighed, but did not argue. He gestured to the keep's main steps, where a cluster of soldiers, northern men by the look of them, were gathering. Arya recognized some faces from Winterfell. Grim, battle-hardened men who had followed Jon south. They looked at her with a mixture of relief and apprehension. One of them stepped forward, a grizzled sergeant missing an ear. "Lady Arya," he said, voice tight. "We came to find Jon Snow, but they said he's gone after the Queen. The city's in chaos." Arya glanced at Davos, then back to the men. "We'll find Jon. Until then, protect yourselves. Protect any civilians you can." The men exchanged uncertain glances but nodded. She could sense their confusion. Weren't they here to support Daenerys, to unify the realm? Now they saw what her rule looked like, and it sickened them. Arya felt a pang of guilt that these men had come so far to witness this horror. But war had left no gentle illusions. She descended the steps swiftly, crossing the scorched courtyard. Part of her mind rehearsed the route she might take to find Daenerys' war council or wherever she might be with Jon. Another part of her mind was thinking further ahead. If Jon could not sway Daenerys, if the Queen ordered the city to be destroyed further, Arya might have to act. She might have to kill the Dragon Queen. And then what? She had no illusions that the Unsullied would simply back down. There would be a bloodbath, pitting the Northmen and possibly the people of King's Landing against the Targaryen forces. But letting Daenerys rule after this was unthinkable. Another tremor rattled the foundation beneath them. A plume of smoke rose from a cluster of buildings nearby. The old city was collapsing under the combined weight of fear and ruin. Arya's steps quickened. Davos trotted behind her, valiantly trying to keep up. They passed through a battered archway into a courtyard that opened onto the heart of the Red Keep's administrative quarters. There, standing among scattered debris and half-collapsed walls, was Tyrion Lannister. He looked smaller than ever, his fine clothes soiled with dust and grime. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. He stared bleakly at a trio of bodies laid out on the ground, covered in tattered cloth. At the sound of Arya's approach, he lifted his head, his gaze fixed on her, then flicked to Davos. There was a hollow sorrow in his face. "Arya Stark," he said dully. "Have you come to kill me too?" Arya shook her head, ignoring the jab. "Where's Daenerys?" Tyrion gave a bitter laugh. "Off being a queen, I imagine, burning those who oppose her." His voice cracked. I told Varys that perhaps she might not, but now, I should have listened sooner. Arya said nothing to that. She could see Tyrion's guilt was already punishing him worse than any condemnation she could offer. Sir Davos stepped forward carefully. Where is Jon? Trying to plead for the city, Tyrion said. He swallowed hard. He went after her a while ago, but I fear for him. She's in no mood to listen. Arya felt a surge of dread. Her instincts clamored that time was running out, that Daenerys could decide at any moment to unleash Drogon on the rebellious masses, turning the city into an even greater graveyard. Or worse, she might decide that the North could never be trusted. She might strike preemptively at Winterfell. The danger was beyond calculation. Still, a small voice in Arya's head urged caution. Storming in to kill Daenerys was straightforward enough, if Arya managed to get close. But every corridor might be guarded by Unsullied. And if she succeeded, then what? The city's people might cheer at the removal of a tyrant, but the realm would be thrown into immediate chaos. The Targaryen loyalists might rally to Grey Worm, to exact revenge. Tyrion watched her expression shift, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face. If she must be stopped, he said quietly, then let it be quick. The city can't take more war. Arya studied the broken man, once the cleverest mind in the Seven Kingdoms. He had pinned his hopes on Daenerys' better nature, only to discover how ambition and grief had warped her. You would see your queen killed, she asked, voice soft. I would see no more children burned, Tyrion said, tears glistening in his eyes. I would see a chance for peace. If that means my queen must die, so be it. He bowed his head. I only regret I didn't do something sooner. Arya nodded in grim understanding. She turned to Sir Davos. We have to find Jon. Davos agreed. Tyrion offered to show them a path through the keep, a series of corridors less likely to be heavily guarded. They moved swiftly, ignoring the rumble of near-distant explosions as sections of the city collapsed, ignoring the screams and the ever-present swirl of ash. Their footsteps echoed in the gloom. Through the broken windows the night sky loomed, starless behind the haze of smoke and cinders. As they navigated a rubble-strewn passageway, Arya couldn't shake the sense of déjà vu. Another labyrinth of stone, another threat of doom, except this time, there were no White Walkers, no undead legion. The enemy was all too human, all too real. She had once believed the greatest threat to the realm was the undead. Now she saw that men and women themselves could unleash horrors far beyond the reach of the dead. They came upon a courtyard that led to a spiral stair climbing one of the keep's still intact towers. The sound of raised voices drifted down, muffled by the stone walls. Arya paused, hand on needle, as she heard Jon's distinct tenor. They exchanged a look, and Tyrion pressed his lips together, nodding that this was indeed where Daenerys had gone. Cautiously, they ascended, each step tentative. In the flickering torchlight, their shadows writhed on the curved walls, ghostly witnesses to the confrontation that was about to unfold. At the top of the stairs, they emerged onto an open terrace, partially enclosed by jagged stone arches. The night air struck them like a wet cloth of soot and smoke. Daenerys stood near the balustrade, her back to them, gazing out over the city. Drogon perched on the far edge, wings tucked in, massive head swiveling watchfully. Jon stood behind Daenerys, close enough to speak to her but not to touch. Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied guarded the approach, their spears leveled. Arya felt Sir Davos' breath catch. Even Tyrion hesitated. Confronting Daenerys in full view of her guards and her dragon was suicide unless Jon could calm her. But they had come this far, and so they stepped forward, hearts pounding. Grey Worm's cold stare fixed on them. He shifted, raising his spear in warning. Daenerys heard the movement and half turned. Her expression was bleak. Jon was in mid-sentence, voice hoarse with desperation. Please, Dany, enough. They've had enough. She regarded Jon with a mixture of sorrow and betrayal. You said you loved me. Jon swallowed. I do. But I love the people too. Nashel, Weselile, Iwane. The queen's eyes flicked over Arya, Tyrion, and Davos. Seeing Tyrion, she set her jaw. You set your brother free, she said flatly to the dwarf. You betrayed me. Tyrion swallowed hard. I believed you once. I believed in a better world. I'm sorry. He loosened the hand of the queen pin from his chest and let it fall, echoing hollowly on the stone floor. I cannot serve you now. Daenerys' gaze filled with cold rage. She looked to Grey Worm. Take him. Jon stepped forward, but Grey Worm and the Unsullied closed ranks. Tyrion did not resist as they seized him, though his face was etched with despair. Daenerys' attention returned to Jon, ignoring Arya for the moment. You, too? She asked, voice trembling. Jon looked pained. I can't support the slaughter of innocents. You know me, Dany. You know this is wrong. She let out a shaky breath. They resisted. They killed Missandei. Her tone hardened. They deserved punishment. Jon's voice rose. Children? Women cowering in the streets. Did they deserve this? Arya could see the rage sparking in Daenerys' eyes. With Tyrion surrendered, Daenerys' gaze darted to Arya. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, Arya thought Daenerys might signal Drogon to unleash flames on them all. Fear for Jon tightened her chest. She mentally noted the positions of the Unsullied, the vantage points. Perhaps she could kill Daenerys with a single thrown dagger, but then Drogon would incinerate them, or Grey Worm's men would cut them down. Ser Davos, reading the moment, carefully raised his hands, a gesture of peace. Your Grace, let Tyrion speak. Let Jon speak. Perhaps we can find another way. His voice shook, but he carried himself with the calm presence of a man who had negotiated precarious truces before. Daenerys' voice was a knife. There is no other way. I have taken this city. It is mine. Anyone who stands against me stands against the rightful queen. She glanced down at the battered city below, the fires painting red shadows on her face. I gave them a chance. I wanted them to love me. If they refuse, then they will fear me. Arya felt a whirlwind of emotion rise in her chest. Her mind flashed through images. Eddard Stark's execution, Sansa's suffering, the Red Wedding, the slaughter of innocents. She found she could no longer stand silent. She stepped forward despite Ser Davos' frantic look, ignoring the Unsullied spears. It's over, Daenerys Targaryen, Arya said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Lay down your claim. Stop the killing, or we'll stop you. Ash fell over the terrace. Daenerys stared at Arya, disbelief morphing into a cold, shimmering fury. Behind Arya, Tyrion closed his eyes as though bracing for the inevitable. Jon seemed torn between alarm and resigned acceptance. This was the moment neither wanted to face, yet perhaps both knew must come. Daenerys' hand clenched around the hilt of a dagger at her waist. Her posture was lethal. You dare threaten your queen? Arya did not flinch. You're no queen of mine. They stood in a still tableau for a heartbeat. Then Daenerys' lips curled in a snarl. Unsullied, she shouted. Seize her. Seize them all. She glanced at Jon, heartbreak etched across her features. If you will not love me, you will fear me. Grey Worm moved instantly, spear lunging for Arya. But Arya was faster. She sidestepped, bringing Needle up in a blur. The clash of steel on spear rang out. Chaos exploded across the terrace as Jon's men, who had followed, rushed to protect him. Ser Davos cursed under his breath, drawing a short sword to parry a blow. Tyrion dropped low, trying to avoid the melee as the Unsullied formed a deadly half-circle. Arya flowed like water around Grey Worm's spear thrust. He was a formidable warrior, disciplined and exact. But Arya fought with the lethal swiftness of a faceless man, weaving inside his guard to slash at his flank. He deflected, spinning with practiced grace. Their blades clashed again, echoing in the smoky night. Daenerys backed away, retreating toward Drogon, who snarled and shifted, wings half unfurled. Jon, caught between wanting to stop Daenerys and not wanting to harm her, held his sword, long claw, in a trembling grip. Dany, he called. Stop this. But Daenerys' face was cold as ice, her tear-streaked cheeks shining in the flickering torchlight. Dracarys, she hissed, though not loud enough to fully spur Drogon's breath. The dragon roared, flames licking from his jaws, but he did not fully unleash them, perhaps because Daenerys had not clearly pointed out a target, perhaps because she herself was too close. Grey Worm, fueled by loyalty, pressed Arya hard. His spear movements were crisp, each strike driving her back a step. She parried desperately, scanning for an opening. The memory of her dance with Brienne of Tarth came to her mind. She recalled the agile steps, the cunning angles. She feinted left, then spun low, raking needle across Grey Worm's calf. He hissed in pain, momentarily losing balance. Arya seized the moment, pressing her blade to his throat. "Yield," she commanded, voice taut. Grey Worm's eyes flashed with unwavering resolve. He gripped his spear, about to attempt another strike. She tensed, prepared to open his throat if he did, but fate had another twist. Daenerys shouted again, and Drogon leapt from his perch, swirling overhead. The gust of wind from his wings nearly threw everyone off balance. The few remaining unsullied near him struggled to maintain formation. Jon roared for them to stop, but his words were lost in the fury of the dragon's roar. Grey Worm took advantage of Arya's distraction, slamming the shaft of his spear toward her ribs. She twisted away, barely avoiding a brutal fracture. Her blade sliced across his arm, drawing blood, but the angle was poor, and he did not fall. He lunged again, unrelenting. Arya realized she could not hold back. She would have to kill him if she wanted to survive. Rage flared in her chest, rage at this madness, at all of it. She pivoted and delivered a precise thrust. Needles slipped into Grey Worm's torso just beneath his ribcage. His eyes widened. He tried to move, but the blade was in his vital organs, and he collapsed to his knees, blood staining his uniform. Arya's heart pounded, a sickened swirl of regret in her stomach. She had killed so many before, yet this felt different. There was no justice here, only necessity. Jon, seeing Grey Worm fall, turned anguished eyes on Arya. She met his gaze, breath ragged. He nodded grimly, acknowledging what had to be done. Daenerys from across the terrace saw Grey Worm fall, her last living pillar of unwavering loyalty. Rage distorted her features. She looked at Arya with hatred so intense it seemed the air might burn. Drogon roared again, descending. His powerful body crashed onto the terrace, claws scraping the stone. Smoke rose from his maw, flames dancing behind his teeth. "Dracarys!" Daenerys shrieked, pointing at Arya. Arya, heart-pounding, dived behind a collapsed section of arch. Drogon unleashed a torrent of fire. The stones heated to a bright glow. Scorching heat lanced across Arya's cheek. She rolled away, searching for any cover, but the space was limited. She saw Sir Davos crouched behind a cracked pillar, shielding Tyrion. A wave of flame incinerated several of Jon's men. The stench of burning flesh was overpowering. Jon shouted, voice cracking with panic. "No, Dany, no." But Daenerys was beyond hearing. She advanced beside Drogon, eyes filled with fury and heartbreak. Arya's mind raced. She could not outrun a dragon. She had only one chance, to kill Daenerys. Without her, Drogon might remain, but perhaps he would not mindlessly torch the city. Arya swallowed hard, bracing herself for a final leap. She reached to her belt, where a small throwing dagger was sheathed. The chance would be slim, but the alternative was death by dragonfire. Jon, in a desperate move, positioned himself between Daenerys and Arya. He held Longclaw up, his voice hoarse. "Dany, please, you don't have to do this." Daenerys' gaze flicked to Jon, tears streaming down her face. "You betrayed me too," she whispered. "You all betrayed me. This is my destiny." Jon's hands shook. He lowered Longclaw, stepping forward slowly. "You can still stop. Please. I beg you." "Nay." She stared at him, some glimmer of love warring with vengeance. For a moment, Arya dared to hope. But then Daenerys' face hardened once more, and she raised her hand ready to signal Drogon again. Arya read her intention. This was the end. She sprang from behind the broken arch, dagger in hand, aiming to end Daenerys' life before she could give the command. Jon, seeing Arya move, realized what was coming. A raw cry escaped his throat. He too moved, though whether to stop Arya or help her, it was unclear. Time slowed. Arya lunged. Daenerys saw the flash of steel. Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, perhaps to shout an order to Drogon, perhaps to scream in rage. Arya felt the dagger leave her fingertips, a fluid throw guided by countless hours of training. It sailed through the smoky air, end over end, aimed at Daenerys' heart. In that fraction of a second, Jon grabbed Daenerys' wrist, pulling her sideways. The dagger sank into her chest, but not where Arya had aimed. It struck her just above the ribs near her collarbone. Daenerys gasped, a choked sound of pain, stumbling back against Jon. Drogon roared, rearing up, and unleashed a wild spume of flame into the night. The terrace shuddered under the force. Jon lowered Daenerys gently to the ground, eyes wide with horror and tears. Blood drenched her gown and she coughed, crimson spattering her lips. Arya stood there, dagger still extended in her hand's arc, heart hammering. She watched Daenerys' eyes flutter, her breath quickening in shallow gasps. "No," Jon said, voice breaking. "Dany, I'm sorry. Daenerys' gaze flicked to Arya, hatred mingled with sorrow. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her fingers curled weakly around Jon's arm, then fell limp. The tension in her body drained away, and she sagged against Jon's chest, her eyes staring sightlessly into the smoky sky. A hush, deeper than the crypt, settled over the terrace. Drogon let out a shriek that sounded like the lament of an ancient god. He swiveled his head, searching for the source of his queen's demise. Arya tensed, prepared to dive away from an inferno, but the dragon reared up, wings beating once, twice, then roared in despair. Flames billowed into the air but not at Arya. Instead, Drogon lurched forward, nudging Daenerys' still form with his massive snout, as if trying to stir her awake. Jon, tears streaming down his face, backed away, trembling. He looked at Arya, anguish etched into every line of his features. She could not speak, her throat tight. Ser Davos and Tyrion emerged from their cover, eyes wide with shock and a kind of grim acceptance. Drogon growled, a wounded sound, and glowered at Arya. She stood still, bracing for death. But Drogon, with a last piteous wail, scooped Daenerys' body into one massive claw and spread his wings. The night air churned with the turbulence of his flight as he rose from the terrace, carrying his queen's lifeless form away into the darkness. The echoes of his roar lingered, fading into the smoky sky. No one moved. No one spoke. The flickering torches and the distant glow of fires illuminated the sorrowful scene. Grey Worm's body lying nearby, the littered corpses of Unsullied and Northmen, the battered stones soaked in blood. On that broken terrace, with the hush of the night around them, the fate of the realm had changed forever. Daenerys Targaryen, last scion of the Targaryen line, was dead, killed by Arya Stark, though aided, however inadvertently, by Jon's desperate intervention. Jon knelt there, face in his hands, silent tears carving tracks through the soot on his cheeks. Tyrion approached him slowly. "Jon, I loved her," Jon rasped, voice ragged. "I loved her, and now—" "It was the only way," Arya said softly, though the words felt hollow. She had not wanted this, but she had known it was the only path to save King's Landing, and the North, from a mad queen. Jon rose unsteadily, as if every fiber of his being had been crushed. He looked at Arya with a mixture of grief and understanding. "What happens now?" he asked, voice hollow. Arya swallowed hard. She glanced around, at the dead, at the ruin, at the tortured city. "We try to mend what we can," she whispered. "We end the fighting." Tyrion bowed his head. "The queen is dead. The Unsullied, those that remain, might not accept this, but they have no leader now that Grey Worm is gone. Perhaps we can negotiate a truce." Ser Davos let out a long, shaky breath. "The realm will need a ruler." And quickly, "No, Rowie." Jon stepped back, shaking his head vehemently. "I don't want it. I never wanted it." Arya looked at him, her expression pained. The rightful heir by blood was Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen. He could claim the throne if he wished. But he had seen what kingship did, what power corrupted. He recoiled from it more fiercely than ever. She recognized that, saw it etched in the lines of his face. Sansa was far away in Winterfell, the only Stark truly prepared for governance. But Sansa's place was the North. And though the lords might have accepted a queen in the past, they might not now. The realm was in tatters. In the heavy quiet, Tyrion's gaze shifted to Arya. His eyes flicked across her face, searching. "You are the one who killed the Night King," he said softly. "You ended this madness tonight." He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. Who better to sit the Iron Throne than the woman who freed the realm from 2 tyrants? Arya's blood ran cold. She shook her head, a vehement denial at her lips. I can't rule. I am no leader. You're Arya Stark, Tyrion cut in gently. You have Ned Stark's honor, and you have proven your cunning and bravery beyond all doubt. Jon stared at Arya, eyes widened. She doesn't want that. She's never wanted that. Arya swallowed. Indeed, the notion was alien, horrifying. But as she looked around, at the smoldering city, at the broken keep, at the people who needed someone to guide them, she felt a twist of destiny. She had spent so long being driven by her kill list, by vengeance. Now she was free of that burden, but a new responsibility beckoned. She had once told the faceless god that she was Arya Stark of Winterfell, and she was going home. But now, where was home? A distant commotion drifted up the stairwell as a handful of northern soldiers arrived, weapons drawn, scanning for threats. When they saw the bloodshed and recognized Arya and Jon, relief and confusion mingled on their faces. One among them blurted, "Is it over? The Targaryen queen?" Jon nodded numbly. Gone. Slowly, uncertainly, those men turned to Arya, as if by silent agreement. She had been the unstoppable force who ended the Night King, and now she had ended Daenerys Targaryen. Word would spread quickly. The city might rally behind her if she took the throne. Or perhaps they would revile her as a usurper. The only certainty was that the realm was on the brink, needing a unifying figure. Arya felt her breathing quicken. She wanted to protest, to say that Sansa was better suited, that Jon was the rightful heir. But she saw that Jon could not accept the crown. And Sansa was too far, too distant. If Arya left now, the realm would descend into further chaos. Another power-hungry lord might seize King's Landing. More blood would be spilled. Her home would remain in jeopardy. She gazed at Tyrion, whose earnest look betrayed a faint spark of hope. She gazed at the battered city, remembering the children in the streets, the old men who had rung the bells. She gazed at Jon, who still trembled with grief. And she understood that sometimes, fate offered no comfortable choices. Gods, Arya whispered, hardly believing the words forming in her throat. If this is what it takes to save our people, if this is what must be done to stop the wars, I will do it. I will sit the throne. Until we can find someone better. I'm no queen, but if it means peace. Her voice wavered. Then so be it. Jon exhaled a ragged breath. Sir Davos pressed his lips together, nodding. Tyrion bent his head. The northern soldiers exchanged glances, and then, as one, knelt. It was surreal. This was not how a coronation was supposed to happen. Not with splendor or applause, not with lords in their finery. It was a blood-streaked terrace under a sky clogged with ash, with the city's ruins below. Yet in that moment, an unspoken truth coalesced. Arya Stark had saved them from ice and fire, from White Walkers and dragons. She was the only one left who could pick up the pieces. She stood there, the wind tugging at her ash-smeared hair. Needle was still clutched in her hand, its tip stained with Grey Worm's blood. She realized with a jolt of irony that she carried the blade of vengeance as she was named queen. She did not feel worthy. She did not feel prepared. She felt only the crushing weight of duty. Tyrion rose, meeting her gaze. "We will summon the surviving lords," he said softly. "They'll want a voice in this. But tonight, the city must be calmed. They need to know the fighting is over." Arya managed to nod, still numb. Her voice emerged, quiet and firm. "Send men to stop the destruction. Help the wounded. Bury the dead with dignity." She swallowed. "Let the people know Daenerys Targaryen is gone, and a Stark sits the throne now." The night was long, filled with the echoes of the dying and the sobs of the living. Fires raged in pockets throughout the city, and the smell of char clung to everything. But gradually, word spread that the Dragon Queen was no more. The unsullied, leaderless and demoralized broke into scattered clusters. Some surrendered, some attempted to flee. The Dothraki, never truly integrated into Westeros, drifted away, returning to the plains beyond the city or pillaging as they went. Bands of northern soldiers and city guards worked to restore a measure of order. Mothers found children, neighbors helped neighbors, and amid the smoking ruins, A shattered city dared to hope that the worst was over. At dawn, the Red Keep's battered courtyard was cleared of rubble enough to allow those who remained to gather. Lords and ladies who had survived or arrived post-battle assembled in soot-stained finery. From across the realm, knights and soldiers and peasants stood to bear witness. The Iron Throne was still inside the ruined hall, so twisted it was half melted beyond recognition. Yet it remained the symbol of power. It caught the pale dawn light, glinting off the thousands of fused blades. Arya Stark stood before it. She wore no crown. There hadn't been time to forge or find one. She bore no regalia but the scars on her skin and the weight in her eyes. To her right stood Jon, silent and watchful. To her left, Tyrion Lannister, his face a mask of somber resolve, and Sir Davos, who had been half pushed, half asked to serve as an advisor for his sense of honor. Around them a ring of northern soldiers replaced the scorched Targaryen banners, with hastily stitched new ones bearing a grey direwolf on a white field. The watchers whispered among themselves. Arya felt their eyes on her, the doubts, the questions, the desperation for someone to lead them. Her throat was dry as she stepped forward. She placed a hand on the melting metal hilt that jutted from the base of the throne. The hall was silent, save for the low murmurs of the onlookers. She glanced at Jon and he nodded gently, offering a measure of courage. She swallowed, then began to speak, her voice echoing in the broken space. "I am Arya Stark of Winterfell," she said, each word careful. "I was not born to be a ruler. I never sought the crown. But the realm is in chaos, and the people cry out for peace. House Targaryen's last queen? Daenerys is gone. The Lannisters have fallen. The city burns." She paused, letting that reality sink in. "We can let the realm tear itself apart. We can let more tyrants rise, or we can stand together, choose a different path." A hush fell as her gaze swept the crowd. She recognized some northern lords. Their relief at seeing a Stark was palpable. She saw few from the Reach or the Stormlands, but perhaps they would arrive soon. She lifted her chin slightly. "I do not pretend to have all the answers," she continued. "But I will do my best to rebuild this city, to heal the wounds left by war. I swear to protect the people of Westeros as best I can. I will not rule with fear but with justice." Her voice cracked on that word, justice, so often twisted by kings and queens. Tyrion by her side glanced at her approvingly. Jon's eyes were misty with sorrow and pride. The gathered crowd whispered, uncertain, but some knelt. And once the first few knelt, more followed. Then others, and more still. It was a cascade of bowed heads, acknowledging Arya Stark as the new ruler, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, or however many remained after the devastation. The hush of that kneeling crowd weighed on Arya more than any chainmail or cloak of gold. She felt her heart thunder in her chest. This was the path she had chosen, or rather the path that had chosen her. Thus began the rule of Arya Stark on the Iron Throne. In the days that followed, she scarcely rested. She oversaw the distribution of food and water to the survivors of King's Landing, ensuring that the common folk were given priority over the remnants of any noble houses. She ordered the city's gates open to receive supplies from the Riverlands, from the Vale, wherever the ravages of war had not completely stripped the fields. She held councils in the open air of the half-collapsed courtyard, refusing the once lavish chambers tainted by memories of cruelty. Tyrion Lannister, at her request, served as a temporary hand, though he doubted he deserved the honor. Sir Davos took a position akin to Master of Ships, or perhaps Master of Laws. Titles were fluid in this uneasy transition. Jon hovered at the periphery, quietly supporting Arya's decisions but refusing any official title, his grief for Daenerys still heavy on his soul. Word spread quickly across the realm. The Dragon Queen was dead, slain by the woman who ended the Night King. Some hailed Arya as a hero. Others called her a usurper. A few whispered that she must be a witch, an assassin who used dark arts to kill whoever opposed her. But the common folk, seeing the relief supplies and the attempts at rebuilding, began to soften their hearts. Here, at least, was a monarch who had walked among them in the streets, who carried scars from real battles, who did not cower behind palace walls. Winterfell responded with cautious optimism. Sansa Stark, receiving ravens describing the events, struggled with conflicting emotions. She loved her sister but never expected Arya to sit on a throne. Some doubted if the North would remain in the Seven Kingdoms. But the news that a Stark now ruled in King's Landing quelled talk of northern secession. Though Sansa maintained her position, she sent men south to help stabilize the capital, a gesture of solidarity with her sister's tenuous reign. The other lords arrived in trickles. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by Daenerys before her death, came to pledge Storm's End's loyalty. Though he had his own heartbreaks and confusions, he knelt before Arya in a private meeting, a complicated swirl of feelings passing between them. Old friends from the Riverlands and the Vale offered men and supplies, hoping to take advantage of the new queen's favor or simply to help restore peace. Slowly, the city that had been ravaged by war began to find a fragile normalcy, though the scars would last for years. Arya set about dismantling the worst vestiges of the old regime. She refused to be enthroned with typical pageantry and pomp, eschewing the idea that she was somehow divinely appointed. No more blind loyalty, she said. Follow me if you trust me. She commanded the forging of new laws to protect small folk from arbitrary brutality. She had learned from Sansa's counsel in Winterfell, and from her own experiences traveling incognito across the war-torn land, that a realm's strength was in its people. Feed them, keep them safe, she repeated often to her advisors. Or we are nothing. The result was not an instant utopia, far from it. Crime flourished in the ruined districts, and unscrupulous nobles tried to exploit the chaos. Arya met those challenges with swift justice, punishing thieves and corrupt officials alike, yet showing clemency to those who stole out of hunger. It was a balancing act, one she struggled to maintain. She had never governed before, and the daily avalanche of decisions threatened to overwhelm her. That was when Tyrion's cunning and Davos' steady hand proved invaluable. They helped her navigate the labyrinth of politics, forging alliances and pacifying rebellious factions. Arya, for her part, did not shirk the hard truths. She walked through the blackened alleys, speaking with survivors directly. She passed out blankets at makeshift shelters. She oversaw the burials of nameless dead and insisted on marking graves. Her presence quieted dissent more effectively than any threat. Here was a queen who had felt the city's pain. Days bled into weeks. The fires died down. Crews of workers repaired aqueducts and cisterns. Food caravans arrived from the fertile regions. The uneasy calm settled into something more durable. The realm looked to King's Landing, waiting to see if the new ruler would restore or ravage, unify or divide. In that time, Jon Snow prepared to depart. He spoke little of his plans, but Arya knew the burden he carried. One morning, in the same courtyard where so much blood had been spilled, they stood together. The ashes had been cleared. The sky was pale with dawn. Jon wore traveling leathers, a cloak of wolfskin thrown over his shoulders. Ghost trotted by his side, red eyes flicking watchfully. "You're leaving?" Arya asked softly, though it was no surprise. Jon nodded, glancing away. "I can't stay here. The city, the throne, none of it is me. I need the north, the quiet, maybe beyond the wall, where I can breathe." He paused, then met her gaze. "You have grown so much, little sister." She let out a trembling laugh. "So have you, brother Doughty." He took her hand, the warmth of his calloused palm comforting. "You'll be a good queen, Arya. Better than most, better than all." His eyes flickered with the ghosts of regret. "I'm sorry. For everything." She squeezed his hand. "There's nothing to be sorry for. We did what we had to do." "Tori." He embraced her, the solidity of his presence momentarily banishing her anxieties. She smelled the leather and the faint tang of metal, reminding her of all the battles they had fought. When they parted, tears shimmered in both their eyes. "When you see Sansa," Arya said, "tell her I miss her. Tell her I'll make sure the North remains respected, free to govern itself as it sees fit. I won't force her hand." Jon nodded. "She'll appreciate that." He studied Arya for a long moment as if memorizing her face. Then, with a final quiet farewell, he strode away. Ghost followed at his heels, and soon he was gone, one more figure fading into the tapestry of Arya's life. The days continued. Lords arrived to pledge fealty, or at least to negotiate their status. A great council was convened to address the realm's future, wherein Arya proposed radical ideas, like reducing the absolute power of the monarchy, allowing regional governance and ensuring no single ruler could devastate the land on a whim of madness. Some balked, fearing the loss of tradition or personal power. Others saw a reason in it, acknowledging that too many had died because of the ambitions of a single person. Tyrion became a surprising champion of these reforms, using his wit and knowledge of Westerosi law to shape a new framework. Arya didn't pretend to be a legal scholar, but she knew right from wrong and insisted on checks against tyranny. Over endless sessions, the new order took shape. Meanwhile, word drifted from across the narrow sea that Essos was in turmoil. With Daenerys' armies gone or scattered, pockets of power reasserted themselves. But that was for another day. Arya's concern was the people of Westeros, who desperately needed stability. She authorized the rebuilding of burned neighborhoods, funded by the crown's treasury, what little remained, supplemented by forced contributions from wealthy lords who had profited under Cersei's reign. When protests arose, she listened to them, an odd novelty that left many lords flustered. The seeds of a new relationship between ruler and ruled were sown, though only time would tell if they would flourish. Through it all, Arya sometimes wondered if she was living someone else's life. She was a wolf in a kingdom of dragons and lions, wearing a crown she never asked for. At night, she dreamed of the open road, of the free air, of traveling west of Westeros. She dreamed of Gendry, of Sansa, of her father, of battles and faces she had worn. The weight of the realm pressed on her shoulders, but she stood tall. She remembered her father's sense of honor, her mother's fierce love, her sister's resilience, her brother's bravery. She carried them all within her. As the weeks turned to months, King's Landing began to heal. New houses rose from the rubble, markets reopened, ships bearing trade docked at the ports, seeking an audience with the new queen. The Red Keep's repairs began. Though Arya refused to dwell in the opulent quarters, she instead used a modest suite that overlooked the city. The Iron Throne itself stood untouched, half melted, its jagged silhouette a reminder of the cost of absolute power. Sometimes Arya stood before it, hand resting lightly on a twisted metal blade, thinking of all the blood spilled for that seat. She had no illusions that she could wash away that blood in a single reign, but she intended to try. And so it was that Arya Stark became the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Through trial and sorrow, she endeavored to lead with mercy rather than fear, determined that no more children burn in the crucible of ambition. She offered pardons to those who laid down arms, extended hands to old enemies, and sought alliances built on trust. She listened to small folk as well as lords, forging a new sense of unity in a realm weary of war. Over time, her list of enemies shrank to insignificance, and her list of allies grew out of respect and awe. Some whispered that the Queen Arya was as deadly as she was just, that she could slip into shadows and deliver death to those who betrayed the realm. Whether that was myth or truth mattered little. Fear of her skill certainly kept many from trying. But her clemency earned her a different kind of loyalty, something neither Joffrey nor Cersei nor Daenerys had truly managed. Genuine devotion from a people who believed their queen understood their struggles. She was a Stark, after all, and Starks had always been known for their steadfast hearts. Of course, not every day was peaceful. The realm's wounds ran deep. Rivalries flared, old injustices festered. There were those who claimed the Targaryen line would rise again. Others lamented that a mere assassin had stolen the crown. But Arya faced these threats with calm ferocity. She did not aim to be loved universally, only to be fair. And while she might never relish the Game of Thrones, she played it better than most, armed with her father's sense of justice and her own lethal cunning. In a city that had known only the madness of power, where kings and queens had butchered each other for the sake of a steel chair, Arya Stark's rise to the throne marked a new chapter. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The realm bore too many scars for that. Yet hope flickered in the corners of King's Landing's battered streets, in the watchful eyes of children who found reason to smile again. And when travelers spoke of the queen, they told stories of a girl who had once been no one, who became someone, and then became everything a realm might need. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, Arya gazed into the darkness, remembering who she had been, a girl with a sword named Needle, a girl with a list of names. She would feel the phantom weight of those names on her tongue. Cersei, Joffrey, the Mountain, Ilyn Payne, Daenerys Targaryen, names that had once haunted her. They were gone now, all of them. And in their place? A crown, a throne, a realm that needed healing. She was not the same girl who had left Winterfell so long ago. Yet she was still Arya Stark. That truth grounded her, even as she wore the mantle of queen. She kept Needle close, never letting it rust, never hiding it behind velvet and gold. It was part of her, just as the kingship was now part of her. And though the future was uncertain, she faced it with eyes unclouded and a heart that refused to yield. Thus did Arya Stark, once a child forced to flee her home, once a killer in the darkness, once a savior of the living world, sit the Iron Throne. The bells of King's Landing, silenced by the horror of war, eventually rang once more. This time they tolled not for surrender or for the arrival of conquest, but for the simple promise that tomorrow might be kinder, that a queen who was also a wolf could guard them in a world too often ruled by dragons and lions. And so the realm turned a page, uncertain but hopeful, under the reign of the girl who had once been no one, and who had become in the end, the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. In the days following Arya Stark's ascension, King's Landing woke each morning to the sight of a queen who walked among the people rather than hid behind the Red Keep's scorched ramparts. Even so, the city's wounds ran deep, and no single gesture or decree would heal them. Ash still blanketed rooftops, drifting in the faint breezes that carried the stale tang of smoke long after the last of the great fires were quenched. The black scars on the skyline told a story of dragonflame and desperation. Some said it would be generations before anyone forgot the day Daenerys Targaryen brought fire upon the capital. Others doubted it would ever be forgotten. Yet in the midst of that ruin, scaffolds rose around the battered Red Keep. Broken cobblestones were pulled up and replaced, bodies were exhumed with grim reverence, and at the new queen's command, every unmarked grave was given some token of acknowledgement. A carved stone, a wooden plaque, at least a scrap of cloth to mark that a person had once lived and breathed there. Arya's own routines were simple and austere. She rose early, just as the sky paled behind the smoke-stained towers, often training alone with Needle or riding through the city with minimal escort, checking on the workers laboring to remove wreckage or distribute bread. She would pause to speak with children peering wide-eyed from behind the half-rebuilt doorways, or help a farmer hoist a sack of grain onto a wagon. It remained startling to many who had lived under kings and queens that seemed more myth than flesh. The small folk whispered that this new queen was far too mortal, far too real, to fit the lofty aura of the Iron Throne. Yet, that was what made Arya stand apart. She met their eyes without pretense, her footsteps sure on the same muddy ground they all trod. Tyrion Lannister, despite his self-doubts and guilt over how everything had transpired, served as Hand of the Queen. He wore no badge for some time, for the old hand's pin had rolled away during the chaos of the final confrontation with Daenerys, and Tyrion was reluctant to bear it again. Still, he stood at Arya's side in council sessions, offering advice gleaned from decades of surviving the most dangerous courts in Westeros. He suggested conciliations for rebellious lords, crafted edicts for rebuilding King's Landing, and carefully navigated the politics of distant regions. More than once, he commented wryly that he felt he'd used up at least 9 lives just getting this far, and he had no illusions that he was forgiven by all. The surviving Unsullied were fewer in number, scattered and leaderless after Grey Worm's death, and uncertain where to place their loyalty. Tyrion's cunning, combined with Arya's measured clemency, convinced most to either sail back across the narrow sea or lay down their weapons for good. A fraction stayed on as a small mercenary band, grudgingly swearing not to raise arms against the new regime. In exchange, Arya allowed them safe passage and a share in the city's mercantile opportunities if they so wished. Slowly, tension eased, and the city teetered away from open conflict into an uneasy peace. Sir Davos Seaworth was present each day as well, moving at Arya's side with the unassuming calm of a man who had navigated countless storms. He offered pragmatic advice on shipping lanes, trade routes, and how to organize relief efforts. His voice, gentle but firm, helped calm heated disputes in the open-air councils Arya insisted on holding. In that battered courtyard, under a sky still carrying the ghosts of war, they heard petitions from peasants and lords alike. One day, a pair of butchers might come to blows over stolen livestock. The next, a minor noble from the Crown lands might arrive to protest new taxes earmarked for the city's reconstruction. Through it all, Arya listened, Tyrion reasoned, and Davos mediated, forging a fragile web of cooperation. Nobody was entirely happy, but neither were they wholly ignored. At night, Arya sometimes couldn't sleep, her mind restless with too many thoughts. She often walked the ruined halls of the Red Keep alone, ghosts of memory rising in every echoing footstep. In half-collapsed passages, she sometimes caught glimpses of how it must have looked when the Targaryens first built it. Grand tapestries, polished floors, the hush of conspiratorial whispers behind thick doors. Now the keep was a skeleton of its former self, walls cracked by dragonfire, the roof partially collapsed, every surface scorched or broken. A few times, she discovered hidden alcoves or old passages in the gloom and dust, places that reminded her of her younger self, a girl who had once skulked through Red Keep corridors, half invisible to those who saw only lords and ladies. Sometimes, the memory of being that girl struck her like a blow, a sense of how far she had come, through the horrors of war, the nights of near starvation, the training in Bravos, the frozen fields beyond the wall. Now she was here, burdened with a crown she had neither sought nor expected. When she felt the ache of that weight, she let her thoughts drift to the faces of her family. Ind, Caitlin, Rob, Sansa, Bran, Jon. And she remembered that even if she was alone in these corridors, she was never truly alone in spirit. 1 week after Daenerys' fall, the first wave of regional lords arrived to assess Arya's rule. Lord Jon Royce came from the Vale with a token force of knights. Edmure Tully, having recovered from his humiliations under the Freys, represented the Riverlands, though half the land was still in disrepair from the wars. From the Reach came a cautious envoy, though no Tyrells remained. House Tyrell had been extinguished. Instead, a new cluster of smaller lords and ladies arrived, uncertain who should claim paramount power. Gendry Baratheon came from Storm's End, forging an alliance of convenience with a handful of lesser Storm Lords, all of them uneasy about what lay in store. From Dorne, a lone emissary traveled north, eyes watchful, for Dornish pride had never fully accepted the Iron Throne's dominion, and with so many upheavals, they remained suspicious. The Iron Islands, battered by their own internal strife, had not sent a formal delegation, only a raven with uncertain words from Yara Greyjoy, who wrote that she would maintain her people's independence but had no quarrel with Arya Stark for the time being. The courtyard ceremony that greeted these lords was subdued. Rather than a grand reception, Arya walked out dressed in a simple dark tunic, a gray cloak pinned by a single wolf's head brooch, her hair pulled back. Tyrion and Davos flanked her. The lords, used to more pomp and heraldry, found themselves slightly off balance. But after so many years of war, perhaps they were relieved that the greeting was genuine, if nothing else. Edmure Tully, older and a bit stooped, bowed stiffly, caution in his eyes, but Arya stepped forward and embraced him. He had been captive for so long, a puppet to the Lannisters and Freys, that tears welled in his eyes when she whispered, "We're family, Uncle. Let's see if we can set things right this time." Lord Jon Royce, imposing in his heavy cloak, bent his knee. "The Vale answers your summons, Your Grace," he said gruffly, scanning her face as if to judge her worthiness. Arya met his gaze with steady calm. He straightened, murmuring that the Vale still revered House Stark as its ally. Gendry bowed next, though not before a moment of awkward hesitation. Arya acknowledged him with a nod. A subtle exchange of emotion passed between them. Unspoken memories of forging dragonglass weapons at Winterfell, of stolen kisses in the flicker of candlelight. Now their stations had changed drastically. He was Lord Baratheon of Storm's End, and she was Queen on the Iron Throne. She wondered if that gap was too large to bridge. Yet they had both walked through fire to get here, and she found a certain comfort in having him near. The delegates from the Reach introduced themselves. Minor lords named Redwine, Mullendor, and Hightower, each seeking to assert some measure of authority in the power vacuum left after the Tyrell's demise. 1. Lord Garrett Mullendor spoke grandly of the Reach's resources and produce, obviously angling for favor. Arya listened without much reaction, grateful that Tyrion was beside her to navigate the intricacies of alliances. The Dorne emissary, Lady Namella of House Santagar, was curt, offering only a polite greeting and ambiguous promises of future cooperation. Arya did not push. She sensed that Dorne would remain aloof until they were satisfied that King's Landing was stable and not about to unleash more chaos on them. That evening, They convened what passed for a royal council, a ragged gathering in the largest intact room of the Red Keep. The tapestries were gone, the windows cracked, and rubble had been cleared only that morning, leaving bare stone. A long wooden table had been scavenged from the remains of some lesser hall. Around it, torches flickered, casting restless shadows. Arya sat at the head, her expression calm but inwardly churning. To her right, Tyrion took notes, occasionally sipping watered wine. Davos stood close by, arms folded. The assembled lords took their seats, exchanging cautious glances. Gendry found a place near the end. Lord Jon Royce and Edmure Tully bracketed him, both watchful. Tyrion cleared his throat. "My lords," he began, "we meet in a time of great uncertainty. The Dragon Queen is no more, and her grace, Arya of House Stark, sits the throne. Yet we all know the realm is wounded. We face famine and ruin if we don't unite and rebuild." Edmure, lines of weariness in his face, asked about the Riverlands. "My people have endured too many armies marching across our fields. Will we see respite? Or is there another war lurking?" Arya replied with quiet earnestness, "No more war, if I can help it. The city is broken, and I have no intention of marching an army anywhere but toward reconstruction. The realm's resources should go toward feeding people, not killing them." "One." Lord Jon Royce eyed her. "Sounds honorable, Your Grace, but words are wind, as the saying goes. How do you intend to protect us if new threats arise? The Iron Islands are unsettled. Dorne is watchful. Some Targaryen loyalists might still stir trouble. Will you muster an army if we need one?" Arya hesitated. She glanced at Davos, then at Tyrion, then answered, "We will defend the realm if necessary, but we will not provoke more bloodshed. Jon Snow is in the north. He has vowed to keep watch there, even beyond the wall if need be. In the rest of the kingdoms, we rely on loyal men who want peace." Gendry, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Storm's End was never eager to go back to war after the conflicts we've seen, but the Stormlands are still recovering from Cersei's demands for troops and from losing so many to the undead in the north. If you need men, I can muster some, but I prefer they remain farmers, blacksmiths, and stable hands, not soldiers." Tyrion nodded. "Exactly. Rebuilding is our priority. We propose a realm-wide levy on certain lords whose lands remain fertile to supply King's Landing and the more damaged regions with food. We also propose a rotation of labor to clear roads and repair bridges to ensure trade routes remain open." At that, Lord Garrett Mullendorf from the Reach bristled. "Our lands may be more intact than others, but we've had our share of difficulties. We cannot be expected to feed the entire realm. The monarchy, for that matter, has little coin left. How shall we be compensated?" Arya felt a flare of irritation. She could sense the precarious nature of these negotiations. The last thing the realm needed was a petty squabble over gold, while people starved in the shadow of the city's blackened walls. But she remembered Sansa's advice about how to handle lords with unwavering courtesy, no matter how vexing. She forced herself to remain calm. "We have a meager royal treasury, but I propose we build incentives. Tax relief in future seasons for those who supply grains now. Also, once the city's markets revive, trade through King's Landing will yield profits for the Reach. We all stand to benefit if the capital and the roads are stable." Mullendorf frowned but seemed to consider it. Meanwhile, Tyrion took note of the arrangement, aware it would require constant vigilance to keep everyone in line. The discussion continued well into the night, focusing on the specifics of food distribution, rebuilding, and where funds or labor might come from. Now and again, the lords bickered, but Arya's voice, calm and unyielding, carried them forward. When the hour grew late, she ended the session, promising to hammer out details within the week. The lords dispersed, some muttering, some grudgingly satisfied. Gendry lingered, standing by the sputtering torches as the others departed. Arya approached him, the corners of her mouth curving into a faint smile. "I'm sorry that was so tedious. I never thought I'd be wrangling about bushels of wheat and barley." He gave a small shrug. "Better that than swords. It's good to see you, Arya, Your Grace." He corrected himself awkwardly, though a glimmer in his eyes suggested he found the title both proud and absurd when it came to her. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me here." She studied him, recalling their shared history, learning from each other's differences, forging weapons for the fight against the undead, that moment after the battle when they had come together in the hush of night. "I do want you here," she admitted quietly. "I need people I can trust." He nodded, swallowing. "You have that. Storm's End is yours to command." They looked at each other for a moment, two battered survivors of 1,000 tragedies, lines of exhaustion etched on both faces. "Thank you," Arya said. "I mean it." He started to say something else but then paused. Hesitation flickered in his eyes. "I heard you might be wedding someone soon, or at least that some lords have suggested you marry to strengthen your hold on the throne." A wry smile tugged at his lips. "The talk is that any number of them are eager to offer their sons, or themselves." Arya snorted softly. "I've had enough of lords offering me their heirs like I'm a broodmare. I've refused them all. The council grumbles that I should secure an heir to the throne, to ensure stability. But I never asked for any of this. I know it might be necessary someday, but—" She trailed off, suddenly weary at the thought. "Too much has happened, Gendry. I can't see myself in some elaborate ceremony, wearing a crown while every pair of eyes stares, expecting me to produce an heir for them like some breeding mare." She felt a pang, recalling how once she might have shrugged and declared she would never marry, that marriage was a cage. But her life had taken a turn so drastically different from anything she'd imagined. He reached out, touching her arm gently. "I'm no lord's heir in that sense. I'm just Robert Baratheon's bastard, legitimized by Daenerys. But if you ever need an ally," his voice caught, "or if you want something more than an owl." She felt the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her sleeve. Part of her longed to lean against him, to rest her head on his chest, and forget the burden of the crown for a while. Yet fear prickled in her mind. A queen's lover was not a simple matter. Their friendship, their closeness could become a weapon in the eyes of cunning lords. She forced a small smile. "I know. For now, help me keep this kingdom in one piece, yes? We'll figure the rest out later." "Nande." He nodded, understanding. They stood there a moment longer, letting silence speak for them. Then Gendry let his hand slip away, and with a final nod, he left the chamber. Arya remained, lost in thought. She realized that everything about her life was now entangled with the realm's future. Her choices, her heart, even her affections. It was a trade she had made the moment she allowed herself to ascend to the throne, and though she accepted it, there were nights when a quiet voice inside asked, had she made a mistake in refusing to leave this city behind, to seek a simpler path? But the next day dawned, and there was no time for regrets. The city needed her. The people needed a queen who cared more about them than her own doubts. Several weeks passed. Rebuilding progressed. Tyrion and Davos negotiated alliances with the Vale, the Riverlands, and the Stormlands, forging a loose agreement that they would aid King's Landing until it stood on its feet. Supplies began to trickle in, guarded by armed escorts. The city's markets gradually revived. Farmers from surrounding crownlands returned to their fields, comforted by the presence of small garrisons loyal to Arya Stark. A new city watch was formed, an amalgam of remaining Lannister guards, those who had bent the knee and proven they bore no animosity, northern soldiers who volunteered to remain, and locals seeking stable employment. All wore tabards bearing the direwolf of House Stark. Some whispered it was strange to see so many wolves in the capital, but fear of the old Lannister or Targaryen sigils had proven greater. Amid this relative calm, new challenges inevitably arose. Reports came of banditry in the war-torn outskirts, marauding gangs taking advantage of the power vacuum. Tyrion proposed dispatching small but skilled squads to eliminate these roving threats. Arya approved, but insisted on offering pardons to those bandits who laid down their arms willingly. She remembered being a lone traveler once, forced to steal or scrounge to survive. A handful of these criminals accepted the offer and were integrated into the labor teams of the City Watch. Others fought to the death. Slowly the roads became safer. Beyond the capital, uncertain rumblings echoed from the Iron Islands, where Yard Greyjoy ruled with a tenuous hand. A raven arrived, stating that several captains had begun raiding the northern coasts again, claiming the throne in King's Landing was untested. Yara apologized for their actions but insisted she could not fully control all of the Ironborn. Arya read the message and felt a flicker of exasperation. She wrote back, reminding Yara that she had an agreement with the Starks to keep the peace, an agreement Yara had once made with Daenerys, then Jon, then, presumably extended to Arya's reign. If Yara needed help reining in rebellious captains, Arya offered it, but if the raids continued, retribution would follow. Yara's subsequent raven was cautious, vowing that she would handle her own. For the moment, no further raids were reported. Tyrion advised caution, reminding Arya that any sign of weakness could embolden other factions. Arya, for her part, did not relish a fight, but she also refused to appear impotent. She sent a small but formidable squadron of ships, advised by Davos, to patrol the coast near the Vale in the north, making it clear that Ironborn raiders would not be tolerated. The presence of these ships, flying the Stark Wolf, deterred all but the most reckless of raiders. It was a delicate balancing act, projecting enough strength to keep the realm in line, without slipping into tyranny. Matters with Dorne proved more subtle. Lady Nymelia Santagar had returned south, and for a time, no further delegations arrived from Sunspear. A handful of merchants from Dorne trickled into King's Landing, reporting that the new Princess of Dorne, a cousin of the Martell line, though the Martells themselves were nearly extinguished, was uncertain whether to accept Arya Stark's authority. Rumors hinted at secession. Tyrion shrugged and suggested letting them be for a while. Dorne had a long history of independence, and forcing them to bend the knee through violence would only spark another cycle of war. Arya agreed. She wrote letters to the princess, inviting her to meet in King's Landing to discuss a new alliance based on mutual respect. The princess sent polite but non-committal replies, and so it lingered in a stalemate, neither side eager to ignite conflict. Arya hoped it would remain that way. In time, more news arrived from the north. Sansa Stark ruled Winterfell with confidence, her letters direct and carefully worded. She congratulated Arya on her efforts in the capital but made it clear that the North remembered its vow to remain free. The original agreement with Daenerys had been complicated, and now with Arya on the throne it raised questions. Yet Sansa expressed willingness to keep the North in the fold if the realm truly changed. "Show us that this new monarchy differs from the old," she wrote. "Protect us, respect our autonomy, and we will remain loyal." Arya and Sansa exchanged several ravens back and forth, each letter carrying a tone of cautious affection and mutual respect. In the end, they reached an understanding. The North would technically remain part of the Seven Kingdoms, but it would maintain a unique status, free from excessive royal interference, with the right to self-govern on most matters. Arya, recalling her father's spirit, found the arrangement fair. She recognized that the real measure of a kingdom lay not in forced loyalties, but in alliances forged by trust. Meanwhile, King's Landing itself slowly shed the blackened shell of destruction. The charred spires were rebuilt or replaced. Twisted metal pried from the streets, scorched timbers hauled away. Neighborhood by neighborhood markets re-emerged. The Great Septi had been destroyed long ago, but new places of worship were established. Temples to the Seven, small shrines to the old gods for northern folk, and even a corner set aside for the Red God's followers, who remained in the city after the battle against the undead. Arya, remembering the House of Black and White in Braavos, believed that people had a right to their faiths however varied. She allowed each group to pray in peace, so long as they did not harm each other. It was a novelty, for the capital had known deep strife under the faith militant in the past. Now, with no one imposing a single creed, an uneasy tolerance prevailed. One morning, Arya rose before dawn and walked through the city streets unescorted, her cloak pulled low, wanting to see the progress for herself without the fanfare of guards. She meandered through alleys where the stones still bore the scorch marks of dragonfire, stepped around rubble piles that were slow to clear. She saw the living remnants of war, children with soot-stained faces playing in the debris, women scolding them to stay close, men hauling carts loaded with salvaged bricks. Here and there, someone recognized the queen. The wolf badge on her belt, or the outline of her slight figure might give her away, and they would bow or stare. Sometimes she stopped to talk with them, hearing stories of heartbreak and resilience. She met a blacksmith who had lost both his sons in the battle, a mother who had watched her husband perish when the Red Keep collapsed, an old man who had survived 3 sieges in his lifetime and was certain this was the last. They told her of frustrations with unscrupulous merchants or complained about the slow pace of rebuilding. Arya listened, promising to bring their concerns to council. In her mind, she stored every face, every complaint. She was determined that this city, so long abused by kings and queens, would not be trampled underfoot again. When she returned to the keep, the morning sun was high, painting the rubble-strewn courtyard in harsh light. Tyrion was already at work, scribbling a letter, while Davos spoke with a group of stewards about supply inventories. A sense of normalcy, albeit a tense one, had settled upon them. Yet as Arya stepped inside, rubbing tiredness from her eyes, a guard rushed forward, breathless, announcing that a band of Targaryen loyalists had been discovered conspiring in one of the city's burned districts. The guard stammered that they'd found banners bearing the 3-headed dragon, and apparently these fanatics planned to avenge Daenerys' death. Arya's heart tightened. She recalled how many devoutly believed Daenerys was the rightful queen, how she had freed slaves and Essos and inspired fervent loyalty. Many might still view Arya Stark as the usurper who murdered their savior. Tyrion glanced at Arya. "We should quell this quickly. The city can't bear another round of violence." Arya nodded, a cold weight settling in her stomach. "Find them, disarm them, give them a chance to surrender." Word came back by midday that a skirmish had broken out in the backstreets. Some Targaryen loyalists refused to yield. They were outnumbered by the city watch, but they fought with terrifying resolve, shouting Daenerys' name as a rallying cry, accusing the Wolf Queen of regicide. Blood spilled on the cobblestones. By the time the watch subdued them, 6 loyalists lay dead. Another 12 were captured, some wounded. They were marched to the keep in shackles. Arya, flanked by guards, confronted the prisoners in the open courtyard. Their ringleader, a gaunt man with wild eyes, spat at her feet. "Dragon's blood demands vengeance," he hissed. "You killed our queen, betrayed her just as those fools betrayed Rhaegar years ago. Targaryen blood will be avenged." A hush fell among the onlookers. Arya's gaze was stone cold. "She burned the city," she replied quietly, though her voice carried. "She would have burned more if we hadn't stopped her." He only glared. "We would die for her. We still would." Murmurs of agreement rumbled among the other prisoners, some trembling from injuries but refusing to be cowed. Arya raised her hand, stopping the watch from beating them further. A memory surged, how she had once believed so fiercely in her father's innocence, how she had been helpless to stop his beheading. She understood the fury of unwavering devotion, even if it was misguided. "You have a choice," she said. "I will not repay Daenerys' tyranny with my own. If you lay down your arms, accept the peace I offer, you can live. Perhaps not free at first. You'll need to prove your loyalty to the realm, but alive, and with a chance to help rebuild instead of destroy." "Nastol," the ringleader sneered. "We'll never bend to you." Arya felt a pang of sadness. "Then you choose your fate." She glanced at the guard captain, who swallowed. "Those who yield, put them to labor in the city's reconstruction. Give them a chance to earn their release after a set term. Those who refuse," she swallowed, hating the necessity of it. "They have broken the king's peace and killed our watchmen. They must face execution. That is the law." "Nene." The captain nodded, though he looked troubled. One by one, the Targaryen loyalists were asked if they would yield. Some, shaken by the day's events, mumbled that they would. Others, eyes lit with fanaticism, spat curses and refused. The ringleader spat last of all, cursing Arya by every god he could name. A hush gripped the courtyard as he and his fellow stubborn loyalists were dragged away for sentencing. Those who had yielded were taken to the workshops, ankles shackled, to begin their forced labor. Arya stood there, heart pounding, remembering how she had once defied the Lannisters and nearly died for it. She realized anew how easily power became cruelty, how swiftly a queen's justice could turn bloody. She told herself she'd given them a choice, that she couldn't allow murderers to roam free just because they believed Daenerys was rightful queen. Yet it did not make the reality easier to swallow. That evening, when the loyalists were executed by sword, Arya did not attend. She found herself in the Red Keep's empty war room, pacing the length of a table still scorched from dragonfire. She felt the burden of every life weighed in her mind, a constant warning that, Though she wore a crown, she could become as feared as Cersei or Daenerys if she ever let herself be consumed by self-righteous certainty. Tyrion found her there later, silent in the half-light of sputtering candles. He pulled up a rickety stool, wincing at the ache in his bones. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. Arya stared at the blackened stones beneath her feet. "It doesn't feel good." "It's not meant to," Tyrion answered. "Power is never simple. But every day you choose to be better than the last ruler, you honor the realm." "No, see." She closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. "I'm trying." As the capital stabilized, attention turned outward. Envoys from across the narrow sea began to appear, each with varying agendas. Merchants seeking trade agreements, minor warlords hoping for alliances. Arya's name had spread to Essos, though some knew her only as the woman who had killed the Dragon Queen. The freed cities, in particular, were curious. Daenerys had once liberated Slaver's Bay, leaving a tenuous region called the Bay of Dragons in her wake. With her death, many wondered if a new slaver regime might take hold there, or if Westeros would intervene. Arya found these entreaties overwhelming. Westeros was large enough and her priority was healing it. She had little interest in ruling across the sea. Still, the moral dilemma nagged at her. Part of her believed Daenerys' campaign against slavery was just, and if it unraveled now, countless innocents would suffer again. Yet, interfering in Essos would require more than she could spare. Tyrion advised that the best she could do was to let the freed cities govern themselves, perhaps sending emissaries to show moral support without committing armies. That was the course Arya chose, unwilling to embroil herself in foreign entanglements when her own kingdom was still tenuous. In the months that followed, each region took tentative steps toward normalcy. The Vale's knights returned home with assurances that the new monarchy was stable. The Riverlands sent workers and stone to help rebuild the docks. Gendry and other stormlords joined in a treaty that promised mutual protection of shipping routes, thus boosting trade to and from the capital. The Reach, after much haggling, agreed to supply large quantities of grain, receiving future tax exemptions and trading privileges in return. Even Dorne, seeing that Arya had not marched an army south or otherwise attempted to bully them, sent another emissary, a more high-ranking cousin of the Martell line, who spoke with measured politeness of continuing peaceful relations. Throughout these negotiations, Arya remained resolute. No forced subjugation, no undue demands. The new monarchy's watchwords became justice and restraint. Slowly, the realm breathed easier. With stability came the renewal of civil life. Craftsmen opened shops, street performances returned in small squares, a semblance of daily bustle replaced the hush of shell-shocked survival. Patches of the city were still rubble-strewn, but pockets of normalcy bloomed. The Red Keep's courtyard once again saw visitors of many stations. The direwolf banner hung from the ramparts. Fewer skeletons in alleyways, fewer fields unharvested. Winter was receding, the climate mild, promising a decent harvest season if they could keep the roads safe and the people fed. In those days, Arya took small comforts where she found them. She resumed a habit she had developed as a young traveler, reading the old maps of Westeros and beyond, imagining roads not yet taken. It reminded her that she had once longed to see the unknown lands west of Westeros. Now she presided over a realm that stretched from the Dornish sands to the frosty north, from the Stormlands to the Iron Islands, and it felt vast, yet there was still so much more beyond the horizon. She remembered the Braavosi seas, the free wind in her hair when she trained with the waif, the sense of possibility she had tasted. Occasionally she walked at night along the parapets of the keep, gazing at the black waters of the Blackwater Bay, wondering if someday she could pass the crown to someone else and slip away. But each time that dream rose, she pictured the faces of the people rebuilding their lives, and the dream receded. She had a duty here for now. Sometime in the late summer, Jon returned briefly from the north, unannounced. Word reached Arya early one morning that he had been spotted on the King's Road, accompanied by only a handful of companions and his direwolf, Ghost. She met him at the city gates, ignoring the stares of passers-by who marveled at the Wolf Queen greeting a northern hero. Jon looked leaner, sunburned, and he bore new scars across his forearms. They embraced in the dusty road, the city's traffic parting around them. For a long moment neither said a word. Arya felt the pounding of his heart against her chest, was reminded of how many times they had nearly lost each other. They spoke privately in one of the keep's smaller courtyards, away from prying eyes. Jon reported that wildlings had resettled beyond the wall, with Tormund Giantsbane leading them peacefully. The Night's Watch still manned a few strongholds, but with the White Walkers gone, their role had changed. Now they were more like rangers maintaining the peace between the free folk and the Seven Kingdoms. Winterfell stood strong under Sansa's leadership, but tensions flared occasionally. Southerners still trickled north seeking opportunity, and some northern lords distrusted them. Jon offered to mediate, but he found that his presence sometimes caused more friction, as if old resentments were not so easily forgotten. A ghost of sorrow haunted his eyes when he spoke of Daenerys, though he tried not to name her. Arya knew that he carried guilt like a knife in his soul. She didn't press him to talk of it. Some wounds required time alone to scar over. When they finished discussing the North, she asked about his plans. He gave a tired shrug. I thought I'd see how you fare, then head back. I'm no king, and the North stands behind Sansa. That's enough. I prefer the quiet these days. She studied him, sensing how the war and Daenerys' death had carved deep lines of regret in his heart. Stay a while at least, she suggested. See what we're building here. You helped make this possible whether you wanted to or not. He hesitated, then nodded. A few days, maybe. During those days, Jon wandered the city in the same way Arya often did, cloaked and mostly unrecognized. He saw the progress and the scars. Sometimes at sunset he joined Arya on the parapets, both of them gazing out at the bay. Once or twice, they spoke of memories, of the first time Arya picked up a blade, of the direwolves each Stark child once had, of their father's sense of honor. Jon admitted that he was proud of what she was doing. You're keeping the realm together in a way no one else could, he said. It's not what you wanted, but you're doing it anyway. She turned to him, seeing the flicker of admiration and sadness in his face. I've learned that wanting or not wanting a thing doesn't matter once you're in the thick of it. Duty is duty. He nodded. Ned Stark's children learned that young. Maybe that's why we're still standing while so many others fell. Not long after Jon's arrival, a letter came from Sansa Tyrese. She wrote that tensions with the Vale had settled, and the North was content to keep the roads open for trade. She thanked Arya for the resources King's Landing had been providing for those in the North who had lost everything to the war against the dead. In the same missive, Sansa also mentioned that rumors of a Targaryen heir had surfaced in Essos. Supposedly, a distant cousin of House Targaryen had declared himself the rightful king and was gathering forces. Sansa was skeptical, suspecting a pretender capitalizing on the chaos left by Daenerys' death. Still, she cautioned Arya to watch for infiltration or uprisings. The letter ended on a personal note. If you need counsel, remember I am your sister. Write to me. I know well the labyrinth of courts, though you navigate your own labyrinth in the City of Ashes. Arya shared the contents with Jon and Tyrion. Tyrion's face clouded. We should keep an eye on such rumors. The realm barely avoided a civil war when Daenerys burned the city. Another Targaryen claimant could spark fresh chaos. We must be prepared. Maybe send spies to confirm or deny this pretender's claims. Nay, Arya pressed her lips together. Yes, discreetly. I won't raise an alarm unless we confirm it's more than talk. Time rolled onward, and the first harvest under Arya's reign arrived. Grain ships stocked the capital's granaries, and while not bountiful, it was sufficient to avert famine. The small folk gradually breathed easier, readying for winter with no sign of war on the horizon. The city watch patrolled regularly, and though petty crimes persisted, the large-scale violence of the post-invasion chaos was quelled. The lords who had visited earlier drifted back, some with more supplies or new treaties to propose. Others came seeking the queen's justice on old feuds. Arya discovered quickly that half of her reign was sorting out disputes, boundary lines between lords, accusations of raiding or banditry, pleas for favor in the distribution of the crown's resources. She strove to remain impartial, leaning on Tyrion's political sense and Davos' moral compass, but she also exercised her own gut instincts. More than once she recognized a cunning liar trying to manipulate her, and when she exposed them, the court saw that she was no naive girl. In that, Arya's experiences as a faceless man, her skill at reading body language and deception, served her well. Occasionally she felt as if she were waging a quieter war, not of swords but of words and alliances. The memory of open battle, of those raw, violent moments, lingered in her mind with a strange clarity. Now she fought a different sort of fight, one that demanded patience and negotiation instead of stealth kills. Some days, she found it more exhausting than the physical battles of her past. Around this time, Gendry spent more evenings in the capital. The forging of new city gates and reinforcements to the Red Keep's battered walls required skilled smiths, and Storm's End had no shortage of them. Gendry, though now a lord, never lost his knack for the anvil. He personally oversaw the creation of reinforced hinges and portcullis frames, often smudged with soot by the day's end. Sometimes Arya visited his makeshift smithy near the castle gates. They would talk about the practicalities of crafting steel to withstand siege engines, or the best ways to handle the city's new watch. Sometimes, when they were alone, they fell into an easy camaraderie, reminiscent of when they were younger. She'd tease him about his hammer. He'd rib her about being a queen. There was tension, too, an undercurrent of what might have been if not for the crown. But neither spoke it aloud. Gendry would bow in public, calling her, "Your Grace," though with a wry smirk. In private, she asked him simply to call her Arya. It was a fragile line they walked, balancing personal connection with public duty. As the harvest concluded, word spread that the new queen planned to host a modest festival to celebrate the city's survival, a far cry from the lavish feasts of old. But a chance for the small folk and lords alike to gather in a mood not of war, but of communal relief. Tyrion supported the idea, noting that morale was critical to sustaining loyalty. Davos found an old ledger detailing past celebratory traditions. Arya insisted on simplicity, focusing on local music, food stalls, and a small tourney limited to friendly bouts. She saw it as a way for people to let out tension, to recall that life could hold joy as well as hardship. On the first morning of the festival, the city woke to the clang of bells. This time not a call of surrender or alarm, but a signal that festivities had begun. The squares and avenues, many still bearing the scars of war, were adorned with ribbons and flags, a stark contrast to the blackened rubble still visible in places. Small folk from nearby villages flocked in, eager for a moment's respite from hard labor. Local brewers sold ale at discounted prices. Musicians played flutes and drums, their tunes echoing through the half-rebuilt streets. Children gawked at puppet shows retelling old stories of knights and dragons, though some flinched at the mention of dragons, remembering the flames that had consumed the city. The watch kept a discreet eye on the crowds to ensure no trouble erupted. Arya, for her part, moved among the people, wearing a simpler outfit than usual, her cloak pinned with the wolf's head. She watched dancing, accepted small gifts of fruit or bread, and spoke with artisans about how the city fared. Occasionally someone would thank her for saving them from the Dragon Queen, or for the fairness of her judgments. Each time, Arya felt a hollow pang. She remembered that she had indeed killed Daenerys, but the memory was not triumphant, only tragic. The tourney was held in an open field just outside the city, where the ground had been cleared of debris. It was modest, no grandstands or gilded pavilions, but a ring of hastily erected fences and wooden bleachers. Knights from the Vale, the Stormlands, and even a few from the Reach competed in jousting and melee events. Some city watchmen joined in friendly duels, eager to prove themselves. Arya, along with a cluster of lords, sat on a simple dais, no throne in sight, just a wooden chair. She watched with mild interest, though she had little taste for such spectacles. She thought more about how these knights once fought brutal wars. Now they displayed their skill in staged combat to the cheers of a crowd. Perhaps this was progress. Conflict turned into sport rather than reality. When one young knight from the Vale fell and nearly broke his arm, Arya winced, reminded of the precarious line between performance and real violence. In the end, the champion of the tourney was a tall, quiet knight from the Riverlands, Sir Roderick Bracken, whose house had once warred with the Blackwoods for generations. He knelt before Arya, humbly asking for her blessing. She offered it, giving him a small direwolf pin as a token. He seemed humbled and proud, and the crowd applauded. Moments like that, fleeting and theatrical, underscored how the realm still treasured these age-old traditions, even if the monarchy itself was shifting in unexpected ways. As the festival wound down, night brought a final celebration. Bonfires flickered near the city walls, and people danced under the stars. Arya circulated through the crowd for a while, accompanied by a few guards. She smiled at the sight of children skipping around a blaze, a fiddler coaxing a rollicking tune from the strings. The air smelled of roast meat and spilled ale, and for the first time in too long, the city felt genuinely alive with something other than fear. She lingered at the edge of a bonfire circle, watching a half-dozen couples spin in an impromptu dance. Some recognized her, parted to invite her in. Arya hesitated, not used to being the center of such spontaneous revelry. But something in her heart tugged, memories of simpler joys, of the old North, of carefree moments before the weight of the world descended. Tentatively, she stepped forward, letting the music guide her steps. The watchers cheered, and for a few bright moments, she lost herself in the swirl, forgetting for once that she was queen, forgetting the blood that had paved her path. It could not last forever, of course. By midnight, the fires were dying, and the city returned to a sleepy hush. Arya, bone-weary, retreated to the keep. Tyrion walked with her part of the way, full of wry commentary on the day's events. After he bid her good night, she wandered the dim corridors, still lit by sparse torches. When she reached her quarters, she found Gendry waiting, leaning against the stone wall outside her door. He looked tired, a bit flushed from the ale and the day's work, but his eyes were warm when they landed on her. "Long day," he said softly. She nodded, heart actively fluttering at the sight of him here, in the hush of late night. "You should sleep. You're forging half the city's gates by yourself, aren't you?" He smiled. "My smiths are quite capable. I only look in on them." The festival was something else. For a moment, it felt like the wars were a lifetime ago. "Nay." Arya studied his face, lit by the wavering torchlight. She remembered the Gendry who had first traveled with her, the awkward boy who teased her about being highborn. Now they were both grown, both shaped by tragedies and impossible triumphs. "The wars aren't so far behind," she murmured. "But at least we have a bit of peace now." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Arya, His words stuck. "I've been meaning to tell you, I'm proud of what you've done, of what you're still doing." She swallowed, meeting his gaze. "Thank you. That means a lot. Now we're..." A silence settled, thick with the tension of unspoken feelings. Finally, he drew a breath. "Would it be terribly presumptuous if I asked to remain in the city a while longer? Storm's End can manage without me. There's more to do here, and I'd like to be near if you need me." A flicker of relief and affection warmed her chest. She nodded, voice catching. "I'd like that." Then, before she could second-guess herself, she closed the distance and laid a hand on his cheek, leaning up to brush her lips against his. It was not the desperate, fearful kiss of the war against the dead, but a quieter, gentler affirmation that they had somehow both survived and still cared for one another. For a moment, the world receded. When they parted, Gendry's eyes shone with a hope that mirrored what Arya felt in her own heart. She exhaled softly, stepping back. "We'll figure it all out," she said, her voice low. "Somehow." He nodded. "One step at a time." With a final smile, he bowed slightly, perhaps more out of habit than necessity, and departed down the corridor, leaving Arya with the swirl of emotions that came from allowing herself this small piece of happiness amidst the burdens of crown and realm. In the following weeks, Gendry remained a presence in the city, consulting with Tyrion on fortifications, dining occasionally with Arya, and discreetly spending time with her behind closed doors. Rumors might have spread among the servants and guards, but none dared to cause a stir. Most believed that if the queen chose to take a lover, it was her right, especially one so devoted to the realm's rebuilding. A few lords cast curious eyes, wondering if a formal match might be announced. Arya said nothing on the matter, still uncertain. Yet the closeness between her and Gendry provided a subtle anchor in her life, a reminder that she was more than just a distant figure on a battered throne. Even as personal matters took on a softer note, the realm's politics refused to remain still. Raven after raven arrived with bits of news. The rumored Targaryen pretender in Essos was apparently gaining some traction, raising a sellsword company and proclaiming an intention to liberate Westeros. Meanwhile, the tensions in the Iron Islands flared again. Yara sent word that certain captains threatened to declare independence not just from the throne, but from her leadership as well. The uneasy peace with Dorne also remained overshadowed by the possibility that, If an opportunity arose, the Dornish might once again try to break free from the crown entirely. And though the North had found a measure of stability, Jon wrote that wildling disputes required delicate handling, not to mention the simmering resentments among certain northern lords who disapproved of any tie to King's Landing, even if a Stark sat the throne. One crisis emerged in the Reach, where Lord Garrett Mullendor, one of those who had negotiated the grain supply to King's Landing, died under suspicious circumstances. His heir, a hot-headed son named Torrhen Mullendor, blamed House Hightower for foul play. Accusations and threats flew, and soon talk of open conflict rippled through the orchard-laden counties. Arya, alarmed, dispatched Tyrion and Davos as envoys to defuse the situation. They traveled to Old Town and Mullendor lands, urging calm and investigating the matter. After weeks of tense negotiations, they uncovered that Mullendor's death likely stemmed from poison administered by a disgruntled retainer who had lost family in Daenerys' invasion. An act of personal vengeance rather than a political plot by House Hightower. Tyrion carefully orchestrated a settlement that required the retainer's trial, while also extracting a vow from Torrhen Mullendor not to escalate into war. Davos wrote Arya that they had come within a hair's breadth of another large-scale conflict. People remain on edge, his letter concluded. This realm is a powder keg, needing only a single spark. When Arya read that letter, she felt the weight of it press on her shoulders. She looked out a narrow window, seeing scaffolding and fresh mortar on the keep's outer walls, the city stirring below. Had they truly come so close to renewed war over one man's personal grudge? It reminded her that the seat she held, however reluctantly, was the linchpin holding together lords whose pride and grudges ran deep. One misstep could unravel it all. Sometimes it seemed that the entire realm walked on eggshells, hoping the queen who had killed the dragon wouldn't fail them. But Arya refused to be paralyzed by worry. She pressed forward with the reforms she'd begun. She convened another meeting with representatives from the major houses, hammering home the need for cooperation. She ordered expansions of the city watch to protect merchant caravans and quell banditry. She commissioned repairs to the roads leading to Old Town and Lannisport, insisting that better infrastructure would ensure trade and reduce friction. She also recognized the need for some representation of each region in her small council, inviting Edmure Tully to represent the Riverlands, a bannerman of Jon Royce for the Vale, Gendry for the Stormlands, and a Hightower representative for the Reach. Dorne declined to send a permanent council member, claiming they had other matters to attend to, but Arya left the door open. These measures helped formalize a sense of shared governance, though whether it would truly bind the realm together in the long run, only time could tell. On a more personal front, Gendry's presence in the keep became less of a secret. One evening, as Arya and Gendry walked together through a half-reconstructed gallery, they came upon a group of servants who hastily bowed. Arya almost laughed at how flustered they looked. Once they were out of earshot, she sighed. "I won't pretend anymore. If people know, they know." He nodded. "We can't keep pretending we're just queen and lord, but I also don't want you burdened by gossip or forced into some arrangement because of me." She turned to him, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I'm not forced into anything. If the realm wants a scandal, let them talk. There's no shame in two people caring for each other." He hesitated. "Some might say if you are to have a consort, it should be a grand match to secure alliances. I'm not exactly." She pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "You're a Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, and the best smith in Westeros. That's enough. More than enough." Yet even as she spoke, she felt the old wariness stirring. She recalled how Cersei had manipulated marriages and alliances. Arya wanted no part of that. But she was no fool. If she were to formalize her relationship with Gendry, it would have consequences. For now, she chose not to decide. The realm's needs overshadowed personal matters. Seasons shifted. Autumn edged closer to winter. The city's scars faded beneath new construction, though pockets of rubble still lingered. Merchants once again crowded the harbor, though many of the large fleets that had accompanied Daenerys were gone or destroyed. Tyrion, upon returning from the Reach, brought news of unusual quiet from across the narrow sea. Reports of the rumored Targaryen pretender had died down, or perhaps the man was biding his time. Davos joked that maybe the rumor was a ghost story to keep Westeros jumpy. Gendry Smiths finished the final reinforcements of the city gates. A hush of normalcy began to settle over King's Landing, something it hadn't known in a very long time. Yet beneath that hush, the sense of precariousness remained. Arya sensed it like a distant drumbeat. She frequently caught the worried glance of Tyrion or Davos, the furtive looks among lesser lords. Everyone seemed to wonder, would this queen endure? Would she hold the realm together, or would the old cycle of rebellion and revenge resurface? For her part, Arya refused to cower. She continued her open councils, continued walking the city unescorted, continued meting out laws meant to ensure fairness. She realized that these actions garnered respect, as well as potential enemies. Some said she was dangerously idealistic, that in times of turmoil, a ruler should be more ruthless. But Arya remembered how many had died under the rule of ruthless kings and queens, and she had no desire to add to their number. The first true test of her new approach came in a most unexpected form, a riot in the western wards of the city. It began as a dispute between two guilds over wages for the clearing of rubble. Tempers flared, accusations of favoritism were hurled, and soon a mob formed, refusing to disperse. The city watch marched in, orders to restore peace. Someone in the mob threw stones. Watchmen responded with clubs. A rumor spread that the Queen's men planned to forcibly expel families who had squatted in the half-destroyed tenements. Before anyone realized the scale, hundreds of people were battling watchmen across the maze of streets. Fires broke out, the chaos reminiscent of the city's darkest days. Arya was in the keep when news reached her that a full-blown riot was underway. She mounted a horse at once, ignoring Tyrion's warnings. Accompanied by a small contingent of guards and gentry, she rode into the western ward. Smoke filled the air, and panicked citizens ran in all directions. Flames licked from windows, illuminating the confusion. She dismounted, pushing through the chaos, her guards calling for her to stay back. But she refused to stand idle. She found the watch captain, a stocky man with a bleeding gash across his forehead, desperately trying to regroup his men. Together they made their way toward the thick of the rioting. Under a half-collapsed archway, a knot of angry locals faced a line of watchmen, both sides brandishing weapons. Arya forced herself between them, cloak swirling, calling out, "Stop!" Some recognized her and drew back in awe or fear. A hail of shouted insults and pleas erupted from the mob. They claimed the watch was evicting them from the only shelter they had left. Others insisted they were simply reacting to an attack by the guild enforcers. Arya listened, scanning faces, hearts pounding on both sides. Then she stood tall, voice ringing out. "This city is ours, all of ours. No one is expelling anyone tonight. Stand down, and I will address your grievances in the morning." Die. Some in the mob wavered. A few watchmen, uncertain, lowered their weapons. But tension remained high. Then a young woman stepped forward, tears cutting streaks through the ash on her face. She cried that her husband had been beaten by watchmen, dragged off. She spat at Arya's feet, accusing her of letting this happen. Arya set her jaw, quietly furious that any watchman would brutalize civilians. She turned a sharp glare on the watch captain, demanding an explanation. He stammered that a group of men in the mob had attacked his patrol, that they had to defend themselves. The blame ricocheted back and forth. The crowd threatened to surge again. Arya drew needle. The watchers all froze. The reflection of fire danced along the slender blade. She didn't raise it to threaten them, only held it with quiet authority. "No more violence," she repeated. "Or I swear, by the old gods and the new, I will find those responsible and punish them. That goes for the watchmen who harmed innocents, and for the rioters who stoned the watch. Enough." Her voice carried a lethal calm that she had honed over years, the same calm she displayed in battles far more perilous than this. Slowly, step by step, the tension drained. The mob began to scatter, watchmen stepped back, and the flickers of raw fury subsided into resentful murmurs. She spent the rest of that night coordinating bucket brigades to extinguish the fires, organizing impromptu medics to tend the wounded. She made sure the woman who had accused the watch of beating her husband was reunited with him. He lay in an alley, battered but alive. Arya knelt beside him, checking for serious injuries. The woman fell at Arya's side, sobbing with relief. Arya looked to her guard. "Get him carried to the keep's infirmary. We'll see he's treated properly." She helped them onto a makeshift stretcher, ignoring the ash and blood clinging to her cloak. By dawn the fires were mostly out, the riot quelled. Tyrion and Davos arrived to find Arya in the rubble-strewn street, dirt-smudged and exhausted, but still directing city workers to provide blankets and bread for those displaced by the conflagration. She told them plainly, "We have to address this now. These people can't be left on their own. If we don't help, the next riot will be worse." Tyrion wore an expression of mingled admiration and worry. "You're doing more than any king or queen has done in 100 years for these small folk," he said quietly. "But be cautious. There are so many demands upon you." Arya nodded, voice low. "I know, but I won't rule from a distance. The realm depends on them as much as they depend on the realm." Got it. She established a commission to investigate the riot, vowing to punish any watchman who had acted unlawfully, and also punish those who assaulted watchmen without cause. Some criticized her for punishing the watch at all, claiming it would weaken discipline. Others said punishing the rioters risked more unrest. But Arya pressed forward with fairness, letting her investigators question witnesses on both sides. Several watchmen were dismissed and jailed. A handful of rioters faced the same fate. The rest were set to labor or restitution. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it demonstrated a commitment to justice. The City Watch, for all their grumbling, learned the Queen would not tolerate brutality. The small folk saw that she would not let mob rule reign either. Over time, the tension simmered down. Gradually, a fragile respect settled, a sense that if nothing else, this queen would treat them with more honesty than her predecessors. As autumn continued, Arya held more open councils and promulgated new edicts, capping interest rates on loans to the poor, offering incentives for building durable homes rather than shanties, establishing a rotating guard duty from each region in the capital so no single lord's men dominated. These efforts garnered mixed results. Some lords resented having to send men to the capital. Others appreciated the shared responsibility. The small folk began to see modest improvements in their daily lives, though for many, the scars of war still ran deep. Arya realized that real change would take years, perhaps decades. The realm at large took notice. In the Vale, they said the Wolf Queen was forging a new order, though some doubted it would last. In the Reach, local rumors credited her with preventing a war among their own lords. In the Stormlands, Gendry's influence spread a narrative that the Queen's rule was tempered by mercy and strength. In the North, Sansa wrote of improvements in trade with the capital, and while not all northern lords approved of the tie, they couldn't deny the benefits. Dorne remained distant but peaceful. The Iron Islands wrestled with their own turmoil. Yara struggled to maintain unity, but at least she wasn't launching raids on the mainland. Through her quiet perseverance, Arya was weaving a tapestry of stability from the realm's tattered threads. Late one evening, near the close of the harvest season, Arya found herself unable to sleep. She wandered through the keep's corridors, eventually climbing a spiral stair to an old turret that overlooked the city. The night was cool, the stars faintly visible beyond the glow of lanterns below. In the distance, she saw the outline of newly rebuilt rooftops, the snaking lines of streets, pockets of flickering light where taverns stayed open. She leaned against the crumbling stone battlement, letting the breeze lift strands of her hair. So much weight upon her, yet in the hush of this high vantage, she recalled the small joys. The day's last letter from Sansa telling of a successful harvest in the north, the nightly presence of Gendry who made her feel less alone, the lingering memory of dancing during the festival. She thought of Jon, forging a new path beyond the wall, and of Tyrion and Davos, who had become unexpected pillars in her life. She remembered how her father had once stood upon the battlements of Winterfell, gazing out over the land with solemn devotion. A flutter of wings startled her. An owl drifted past, silent. She closed her eyes, imagining the old gods of the north, the many-faced god of Braavos, the seven worshipped by so many in Westeros, all watching, all bearing witness to this precarious peace she was trying to protect. She opened her eyes again, focusing on the city. The hush was broken only by distant laughter or a stray shout, carried by the wind. Overhead, the sky stretched vast and mysterious. She felt a pang of longing for the open road, for the ships that might sail west of Westeros, for a life free of these chains of responsibility. But she was Arya Stark, queen of the realm, the girl who had lost so much and gained a crown she never sought. And so she stayed there, on that turret, breathing the cool air. The realm slept, not entirely safe, not entirely whole, but safer and more whole than it had been in a long time. Tomorrow, She would wake and face new problems, sign new orders, settle new disputes. The cycle would continue. Yet a quiet determination burned in her chest. She had survived wars and storms, battles against the dead and the living, the illusions of the many-faced god, and the illusions of politics alike. She could survive this. She could guide this realm toward a future that wasn't carved in blood and fire. She lingered a while longer, letting the night wrap around her. Eventually the cold pressed through her cloak, urging her to seek warmth. She descended the spiral stair and returned to her chambers, where a single candle burned. On a small table lay an unrolled map of Westeros, corners weighed down by stones. She paused, tracing a finger across the drawn lines from Winterfell to King's Landing, from the Wall to the Dornish deserts, from the Iron Islands to the edges of the sea. She imagined the thousands, the millions of souls living in those lands, each with their own stories, their own hopes and terrors. These lives were now bound to hers in ways she was still learning to comprehend. She whispered into the stillness, as if to them all, "I'll do my best." The candle flickered, and in that moment, she remembered the vow she had spoken on this very ground, the night Daenerys died. It had not been a grand coronation vow but a simpler promise, to protect the realm, to shield it from any new tyranny. She would hold to that promise. With a last glance at the map, she moved to extinguish the flame, letting darkness fill the room. Outside, the city glowed faintly, a testament to fragile hope. And somewhere beyond that glow, the wind carried the name of Arya Stark, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, through the battered streets and the fields beyond, out to the lonely moors and shadowed forests, and far across the seas, echoing into a future still waiting to be shaped.